that suggested the previous one. So Amy Lutkin's The Lonely Hunter. And now we're switching into The Lonely Century. So I'm sure everyone that has been tuning in is noticing the theme, which of course is this era's loneliness. Where is it? Mm-mm. All right, Safari. So, just a little reminder before we get started. Oh, and there we go. I have closed captions that I just added to my Twitch, so if anyone could benefit from that or you would just prefer it, I definitely invite you to take advantage of that. But you gotta come over to my Twitch if you do. That's the only place that it is, but it's in you see it's populating live. You would be able to see here. Let me turn this so TikTok can see. So that is available on my Twitch, but either way, we are going to be reading Nerina Hertz, The Lonely Century, and I figured I would start by just reading the little write-up on her website, because I feel like, obviously, who's better to detail what exactly the book is about than the author themselves. So, like I said, this book is called The Lonely Century, Coming Together in a World That's Pulling Apart, and it's by an author, Nerina Hertz. It came out in 2021. So this, I think, does a really great job of building off of what Amy Lutkin's memoir did, The Lonely Hunter. And this is what she says. We'll start with the little bolded text, I suppose. So even before a global pandemic introduced us to terms like social distancing, loneliness was already becoming the defining condition of the 21st century. But it's also one we have the power to reverse. And this is the little write-up on the right side. Combining a decade of research with first-hand reporting, Nerina Hertz takes us from a how to communicate in real life class for smartphone-addicted university students to bouncy castles at Belgian far-right gatherings, from paying for cuddles in the US to nursing home residents knitting bonnets for their robot caregivers in Japan. The Lonely Century explores how our increasing dependence on technology, radical changes to the workplace, and decades of policies that have placed self-interest above the collective good are damaging our communities and making us more isolated than ever before. With bold solutions for us as individuals, as well as for businesses and governments, Nerina Hertz offers a hopeful and empowering vision for how to heal our fractured world and come together again. See, electric cars might be able to help a little bit, but if the electric cars are powered by the overall colonial capitalist structure, they're still going to be polluting and destroying it in an extractivist way. With that said, let's get into it. So, she surprisingly doesn't have a introduction. It just jumps right into chapter 1, which is called This is the Lonely Century. Like I said, anyone who is coming in, if you'd like to see a bigger view of everything on my Twitch, you're invited to come over to that. It's the same username as on my TikTok. The link is in my link tree. All right, let's get started. So this is The Lonely Century, chapter 1. Curled up against him, my chest pressing against his back, our breathing synchronized, our feet intertwined. This is how we've slept for over 5,000 nights. But now we sleep in different rooms. By day, we dance the 2-meter zigzag. Hugs, caresses, kisses, our daily shorthand, now forbidden. Stay away from me, my new term of endearment. Constantly coughing, feeling achy and unwell. I am terrified that if I get too close, to my husband, I will infect him. So I keep my distance. This is March 31st, 2020. And along with 2.5 billion other people, a third of the world's population, my household is in lockdown. With so many people stuck at home, condemned to working remotely, if one still has a job, that is. Not allowed to visit friends or loved ones, getting outside once a day, if at all, socially distancing, quarantining, and self-isolating, it is inevitable that feelings of loneliness and isolation have soared. Just 2 days into lockdown, my best friend messages, "The isolation is driving me potty." On day 4, my 82-year-old father WhatsApps, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Across the globe, staff manning emotional health hotlines report not only massive spikes in caller volume within days of mandatory social distancing, but also that significant numbers are from people suffering from loneliness. My mom won't hug me or get very close to me, one distraught child confides to a volunteer at the UK Hotline Childline. In Germany, where by mid-March hotlines are taking 50% more calls than usual, one psychologist working the phones notes that most callers are more afraid of loneliness than getting infected. Yet the lonely century did not begin in the first quarter of 2020. By the time COVID-19 struck, oh, wow, my sound is so loud. Thank you for the follow, Jeremy Bearing, though. Jeremy bearing my baby? Is that what yeah, I like it. Anyway, yet the lonely century did not begin in the first quarter of 2020. By the time COVID-19 struck around, what's up, I'm gay, many of us had already been feeling lonely, isolated, and atomized for a considerable amount of time. Why we became so lonely and what we must do to reconnect are what this book is about. So for those of you just coming in, my dissertation's about sexual ecologies, and a lot of what I research is called touch hunger. And I look at the way that technologies influence our identities, our relationships, so this book couldn't be any more relevant. Pretty in Pink. September 24th, 2019. I'm waiting seated at the window, my back against the Pretty in Pink wall. My phone pings. It's Brittany. She's running a few minutes late. No worries, I message back. Cool choice of place. And it is. The effortlessly beautiful, gazelle-like clientele with their fashion model portfolios under their arms. Hint at just how hip Cha-Cha Matcha in Manhattan's NoHo district feels. A few beats later, she arrives. Long-limbed, athletic, she scans the room, her smile widening as I come into her gaze. Hey, love your dress, she says. For $40 an hour, I'd expect no less. For Brittany is the friend I have rented for the afternoon from a company called Rent-A-Friend. Founded by New Jersey entrepreneur Scott Rosenbaum, who had seen the concept take off in Japan and now operating in dozens of countries around the world, the company offers over 620,000 platonic friends for hire online. This wasn't the career path Brittany, a 23-year-old small-town Floridian, had intended when she won her place at Brown. Yet, having been unable to secure a job in environmental science, the subject she majored in at university, and anxious about her levels of student debt, she explains her decision to rent out her company as a pragmatic one. Her emotional labor as just another monetizable string to her bow. When she's not renting herself out, on average, she does so a few times a week, so she helps startups with their social media postings and offers executive assistance services via TaskRabbit. Before we met up, I was pretty nervous, not sure if friend was covert speak for sexual partner, or even if I'd recognize her from her profile picture. But within minutes, I felt reassured that this is friends without benefits territory. And over the next few hours, as we wander around downtown Manhattan chatting about #MeToo, her heroine Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and at McNally Jackson, our favorite books, at times I even forget I'm paying for Brittany's company. Although she doesn't feel like an old friend, she does feel like a fun new prospect. But it is at Urban Outfitters on Broadway that she really ramps up the charm, just as the meter on our encounter begins to run out. Smile now permafixed, banter upped, she joshes with me as we rummage through a pile of t-shirts and gamely joins me in trying on Crayola-colored bucket hats. Apparently, they really suit me. Although presumably she would tell me that whether or not it was true. I asked Brittany about the others who've hired her, my fellow friendship consumers. She tells me of the soft-spoken woman who didn't want to show up at a party alone, the techie from Delhi who had moved to Manhattan for work, didn't know anyone in town, and wanted company at dinner, the banker who offered to come over with chicken soup when she was sick. If you had to sum up your typical clientele, what would you say? I ask her. Her answer, lonely 30 to 40-year-old professionals, the kind of people who work long hours and don't seem to have time to make any friends. This book is already coming too close to home, but I'm here for it. Also, welcome anyone that's coming. It's a sign for our times that today I can order companionship as easily as I can a cheeseburger with just a few taps on my phone. That's what I call a loneliness economy, has emerged to support and in some cases exploit those who feel alone. Also, thank you for that share. But in the 21st century, the loneliest century we have known, Brittany's overworked professionals are not the only ones suffering. The tentacles of loneliness reach much further. Even before the coronavirus triggered a social recession with its toxification of face to face contact, 3 in 5 US adults considered themselves lonely. In Europe, it was a similar story. In Germany, 2/3 of the population believe loneliness to be a serious problem. Almost a third of Dutch nationals admitted to being lonely, 1 in 10 severely so. In Sweden, up to a quarter of the population said that they were frequently lonely. In Switzerland, 2 out of every 5 people reported sometimes, often, or always feeling so. In the United Kingdom, the problem had become so significant that in 2018, the Prime Minister went so far as to appoint a Minister of Loneliness. 1 in 8 Brits did not have even a single close friend they could rely on, up from 1 in 10 just 5 years before. 3/4 of citizens did not know their neighbors' names, while 60% of UK employees felt lonely at work. The data for Asia, Australia, South America, and Africa was similarly troubling. Inevitably, months of lockdowns, self-isolation, and social distancing have made this problem even worse. Young and old, male and female, single and married, rich and poor. All over the world, people are feeling lonely, disconnected, and alienated. We're in the midst of a global loneliness crisis. None of us, anywhere, is immune. 6,000 miles from Manhattan's NoHo district, Sato-san is waking up. Round-cheeked and small, a genial twinkle in her eye, this widowed mother of 2 knows all too well what it feels like to be lonely. Burdened with considerable financial worries, her pension not covering her living costs, bereft of support, and her children too busy to care, she frequently felt very much on her own. Before, that is, she took a radical, if not unprecedented, step. Incarcerated now in Toshigi Prison, a facility for female offenders, Sato-san is one of numerous elderly Japanese who have made jail an active life choice. In Japan, crimes committed by people over the age of 65 have quadrupled over the past 2 decades. I heard about this. I don't know if y'all did. I forgot to turn it down. Thank you for the follow, left flipper. In Japan, yeah, okay. Within this age group, 70% reoffend within 5 years. Prison warden Junko Igeno has no doubt that loneliness is a key driver of this trend. Her charges have told her as much. Ryukyu University professor Koichi Hamai, who has studied the phenomena of elderly prisoners, agrees. He believes that significant numbers of elderly women choose prison as a way to escape how socially isolated they feel. Jailed typically for minor offenses such as petty shoplifting, one of the... Oh, where did it go? That's the one thing about a Kindle. Like, sometimes I'll click somewhere on the screen and it'll, like, take me, like, way out of there. Actually, I think the book is broken. Because it took me from one page to like, oh, there we go. Okay, weird. One of the easiest crimes you can commit if going to jail is your goal. 40% of such prisoners report rarely speaking to their family or not having one at all. Half of the seniors incarcerated for shoplifting in recent years were living alone prior to going to prison. Did I skip a page? No, weird. I don't know. That didn't make any sense, right? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to continue. Many describe jail as a way of creating for themselves a community that they can't get at home. A place where, as one octogenarian inmate explains, there are always people around and I don't feel lonely. An environment that 78-year-old prisoner Miss O describes as an oasis, where there are many people to talk to. A sanctuary that provides not only company but also support and care. The elderly are the group we are prone to think of first when we consider who is loneliest among us, and indeed this cohort is lonelier than average. Already by 2010, 60% of US nursing home residents said they never have any visitors. In the United Kingdom, 2/5 of all older people are reported in 2014 that television was their main companion. Meanwhile, in Tianjin, China, an 85-year-old grandfather, one of China's millions of lonely elderly, gained international fame in 2017 when he posted a notice on his local bus shelter. Lonely man in his 80s, it read. My hope is that a kind-hearted person or family will adopt me. Tragically, within 3 months, he was dead. It took many of his neighbors 2 weeks to notice he was no longer around. Such stories make hard reading, and they raise huge questions about how we as a society care for our oldest citizens. Yet it is actually, and perhaps surprisingly, the youngest among us who are the loneliest. I first became aware of this a few years back when I was teaching graduate university students. For not only was it obvious to me when I saw how they interacted during group assignments that they found their face-to-face interactions considerably more challenging than previous generations, but as they plumped themselves down in my office full of anxiety about their coursework and their future job prospects, I was struck by how many confided in me how lonely and isolated they felt. I've noticed that as well. My students weren't outliers. In the United States, slightly more than 1 in 5 millennials say they have no friends at all. In the United Kingdom, 3 in 5 18 to 34-year-olds and nearly half of children aged between 10 and 15 say they are lonely often or sometimes. Again, this disturbing picture is a global one that in recent years has gotten progressively worse. Across nearly every country in the OECD, which includes most of Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia, the percentage of 15-year-olds who say they feel lonely at school rose between 2003 and 2015. Again, in the wake of COVID-19, the numbers are likely to be significantly higher. This isn't just a mental health crisis. It's a crisis that's making us physically ill. The research shows that loneliness is worse for our health than not exercising, as harmful as being an alcoholic, and twice as harmful as being obese. And I don't know about that study. I've heard that that's actually been corrected. So we'll get back to this. I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts if you've seen research that corrects that. Statistically, loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Crucially, this is regardless of what we earn, our gender, age, or nationality. It's also an economic crisis. Even prior to COVID-19 in the United States, social isolation was estimated to cost Medicare nearly $7 billion every year, more than it spends on arthritis and almost as much as it does on high blood pressure, and that's just among elderly people. In the United Kingdom, lonely over 50 were estimated to cost the National Health Service 1.8 billion euro, 2.2 billion in US dollars per year, about the same as spent annually by the entire Ministry of Housing, Communities, and Local Government. Meanwhile, UK employers were losing 8 million euro, $994 million each year due to loneliness-related sick days, significantly more when productivity losses were also taken into account. And it's a political crisis too, fueling divisiveness and extremism in the United States, Europe, and across the globe. Loneliness and right-wing populism are, as we will see, close bedfellows. Especially concerning is that we are very likely to be underestimating the true extent of the problem. In part, this is because of the stigma associated with loneliness. For some, admitting they are lonely is a hard thing to do. A third of UK employees who feel lonely at work have never told anyone. Others may find it difficult to admit even to themselves, believing it to suggest a personal failure, rather than a consequence of life circumstances and a whole range of social, cultural, and economic factors outside of one's individual control. But more than this, the problem is underestimated because of how loneliness is defined. For not only is loneliness not the same as being alone, you can be physically surrounded by people and still feel lonely, or you can be alone and not experience loneliness. It has also typically been defined too narrowly. The loneliness we're experiencing in across the globe. Wait, sorry, y'all. I swear I'm gonna get Kindle down. The loneliness we are experiencing in the 21st century is much broader in scope than its traditional definition. What is loneliness? The UCLA Loneliness Scale was first developed in 1978 by a trio of researchers who sought to create a quantitative tool to measure one's subjective feelings of loneliness. It takes the form of 20 questions designed to ascertain not only how connected, supported, and cared for respondents feel, but also how excluded, isolated, and misunderstood. It remains to this day the golden standard in loneliness research. Most of the studies on loneliness cited in this book use this scale, or a variant of it, to assess a respondent's loneliness. Please take a few minutes to complete it yourself. Circle your answer for each statement at the end and add the numbers together. Do we want to take the scale? Let's take the scale. Okay, so actually, it would probably be too difficult. I don't know. Let's see. Do you all want to do the scale? Because we'll do it if you want to. It says there's 20 questions. So here's the questions, just in case anyone is feeling shy. So the first one is, how often do you feel that you are in tune with the people around you? Number 2 is, how often do you feel that you lack companionship? And these are scale from 4 to 1 or 1 to 4. Number 3 is, how often do you feel that there's no one you can turn to? Number 4 is, how often do you feel alone? 5, how often do you feel part of a group of friends? Number 6, how often do you feel that you have a lot in common with the people around you? Number 7, how often do you feel that you are no longer close to anyone? 8, how often do you feel that your interests and ideas are not shared by those around you? 9, how often do you feel outgoing and friendly? Number 10, how often do you feel close to people? 11, how often do you feel left out? 12, how often do you feel that your relationships with others are not meaningful? 13, how often do you feel that no one really knows you well? 6 more. How often do you feel isolated from others? How often do you feel you can find companionship when you want it? How often do you feel that there are people who really understand you? How often do you feel shy? How often do you feel that people are around you but not with you? How often do you feel that there are people you can talk to? And then the last one. How often do you feel that there are people you can turn to? How did you do? If you scored over 43, you'd be considered lonely. And of course, like I said, I didn't give the scales or anything, but if you were to retake the quiz using a wider definition of loneliness, one that encompasses not only your relationships with friends, family, work colleagues, and neighbors, those the UCLA scale more typically considers, but also your relationships with your employer, fellow citizens, and politicians, and the state, how would that affect your score? A key difference between my definition of loneliness, the one that will be used throughout this book, and the traditional one, is that I do not define loneliness only as feeling bereft of love, company, or intimacy. Nor is it just about feeling ignored, unseen, or uncared for by those with whom we interact on a regular basis, our partner, family, friends, and neighbors. It's also about feeling unsupported and uncared for by our fellow citizens, our employers, our community, our government. It's about feeling disconnected not only from those we are meant to feel intimate with, but also from ourselves. It's about not only lacking support in a social or familial context, but feeling politically and economically excluded as well. I define loneliness as both an internal state and an existential one, personal, societal, economic, and political. As such, my definition is closer to that envisaged by thinkers like Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim, Carl Jung, and Hannah Arendt, and writers as various as Isaac Asimov, Aldous Huxley, George Eliot, and more recently Black Mirror creator Charlie Brooker. reshaped by globalization, urbanization, growing inequality, and power asymmetries, by demographic change, increased mobility, technological disruption, austerity, and now by the corona, too. I believe the contemporary manifestation of loneliness goes beyond our yearning for connection with those physically around us, our craving for love and being loved, and the sadness we feel when we consider ourselves to be bereft of friends. It also incorporates how disconnected we feel from politicians and politics, how cut off we feel from our work and our workplace, how excluded many of us feel from society's gains, and how powerless, invisible, and voiceless so many of us believe ourselves to be. It's a loneliness that includes, but is also greater than, our desire to feel close to others, because it is also a manifestation of our need to be heard, to be seen, to be cared for, to have agency, to be treated fairly, kindly, and with respect. Traditional measures of loneliness capture only a part of this. With that in mind, ask yourself, when did you last feel disconnected from those around you, whether family, friends, neighbors, or your fellow citizens? When did you last feel uncared for or unheard by your elected politicians, or think that no one in a position of authority cared about your struggles? When did you last feel powerless or invisible at work? You're not alone. In the years preceding the coronavirus pandemic, 2/3 of those living in democracies did not think their government acted in their interests. 85% of employees globally felt disconnected from their company and their work. Only 30% of Americans believe that most other people could be trusted, a very substantial drop since 1984, when around 50% did. And when it comes to feeling disconnected from each other, can you remember a time when the world has felt this polarized, fractured, and divided? How we got here. The state of affairs didn't just happen by chance, nor did it emerge overnight. There's a backdrop, a fusion of causes and events that explains why we have become so lonely and atomized, both personally and as a society. As you might have suspected, our smartphones, and in particular social media, have played an integral role, stealing our attention away from those around us, fueling the worst within us so that we become ever angrier and more tribal, making us behave ever more performatively and compulsively in pursuit of likes, retweets, and follows, and eroding our ability to communicate effectively or empathetically. This held true even during the coronavirus lockdown. For alongside the Pope live streaming his daily mass on Facebook, DJ D-Nice throwing a dance party attended by more than 100,000 people on Instagram, the springing up of local Facebook groups in which neighbors who'd never spoken to each other before shared how to stay sane tips, Wi-Fi passwords, and baby milk, racist attacks and hate speech escalated on social media, conspiracy theories circulated ever faster, and marriage guidance counselors told me of a spike in clients feeling lonely because their partners were now even more consumed than usual by their phones. To be sure, structural and institutional discrimination remain factors. A 2019 UK study of nearly 1,000 people found that experiencing racial, ethnic, or xenophobic discrimination at work or in your local neighborhood increases your chance of loneliness by 21%. Meanwhile, a 2020 survey of over 10,000 Americans established that Black and Hispanic people feel lonelier than their white peers, and also significantly more alienated in their workplaces. Gender discrimination, too, can play a role, with sexist behavior having been linked to increased loneliness. But on top of these long-standing structural failings, other new drivers of loneliness have emerged. Our smartphones and I gotta drink water, I think. Like I was saying the other day, like on Thursdays on my Twitch, I started reading Susan Sontag's Illness as Metaphor. Whenever the words seem to like stick in my mouth, that's a sign I need to drink some water. All right. Thanks for everyone that's come in and hanging out. I hope you're enjoying it. I definitely am. I think it's a perfect build off of Amy Lutkin's The Lonely Hunter. But on top of these long-standing structural failings, other new drivers of loneliness have emerged. Our smartphones and social media are just two pieces of the puzzle, though. The causes of today's loneliness crisis are numerous and diverse. Large-scale migration to cities, the radical reorganization of the workplace, and fundamental changes to how we live are critical factors as well. It's not just that we bowl alone. More often than what the political scientist Robert Putnam published his landmark book about everyday American life in 2000. We now do ever less with each other, at least when it comes to traditional ways to commune. In much of the world, people are less likely to go to church or synagogue, belong to a parent-teachers association or a trade union, eat or live with others, or have a close friend than even a decade ago. We've also been having less contact physically, touching each other less, and having less sex. That was what my dissertation was about. And the trend for some time now has been that even when we do stuff together, for increasing numbers of us, this isn't in the physical presence of another person. We attend yoga class on an app, speak to a customer service chatbot instead of a human salesperson, live stream a religious service from our living room, or shop at Amazon Go, the tech giant's new chain of grocery stores where you can leave your shopping without having had any contact with another human being. Even before the coronavirus stuck, contactless was starting to become our way of life, our act of choice. At the same time, the infrastructure of community, by which I mean those shared physical spaces where people of all stripes can come together, interact, and form bonds, has been severely neglected at best, and at worst, actively destroyed. It's a process that began in many places before the 2008 financial crisis, but accelerated markedly in its aftermath as government policies of austerity took a sledgehammer to the libraries, public parks, playgrounds, and youth and community centers across much of the world. In the United Kingdom, for example, a third of youth clubs and nearly 800 public libraries were shut down between 2008 and 2018, while in the United States, federal library funding decreased by more than 40% between 2008 and 2019. Why this matters so profoundly is because such places are not only where we come together, but also where we learn how to do so, places where we practice civility and also democracy in its inclusive form, by learning how to peacefully coexist with people different from us and how to manage different points of view. Without such spaces that bring us together, it's inevitable that we will pull even farther apart. Dog eat dog. The way we now live, the changing nature of work, the changing nature of relationships, the way our cities are now built and our offices designed, the way we treat each other and the way our government treats us, our smartphone addiction, and even the way we now love are all contributing to how lonely we have become. But we must go back farther to fully understand how we became so disconnected, siloed, and isolated. For the ideological underpinnings of the 21st century's loneliness crisis predate digital technology, the most recent wave of urbanization, the century's profound changes to the workplace, and the 2008 financial crisis, as well as, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. They go back instead to the 1980s, when a particularly harsh form of capitalism took hold, neoliberalism, an ideology with an overriding emphasis on freedom, free choice, free markets, freedom from government or trade union interference. One that prized an idealized form of self-reliance, small government, and a brutal competitive mindset that placed self-interest above community and the collective good. I'm smiling because that's the main focus of my work. That's championed initially by both Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, such as Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, and Gerard Schroeder. This political project has dominated commercial and government practices over the past few decades. Really, they mean 60 years. It has played a fundamental role in today's loneliness crisis, in large part because it has precipitated a significant rise in income and wealth gaps within countries across many parts of the world. In the United States, CEOs in 1989 earned an average 58 times the average worker's salary, but in 2018, they made 278 times as much. In the United Kingdom, the share of income going to the top 1% of households has tripled in the last 40 years, with the wealthiest 10% now owning 5 times as much as wealth as the bottom 50%. Does everyone understand that? I'm going to read that one more time. Just because it's a lot. In the United Kingdom, the share of income going to the top 1% of the households has tripled in the last 40 years, with the wealthiest 10% now owning 5 times as much wealth as the bottom 50%. As a result, significant swaths of the population have for a considerable time felt left behind, branded as losers in a society that has time only for winners, left to fend for ourselves in a world in which their traditional moorings of work and community are disintegrating, social safety nets eroding, and their status in society diminishing. While those in higher income brackets can also be lonely, those who have less in economic terms are disproportionately so. Given contemporary levels of unemployment and economic hardship, we need to be especially mindful of this. Second, because neoliberalism has given ever more power and freer rein to big business and big finance, allowing shareholders and financial markets to shape the rules of the game and conditions of employment, even when this comes at excessively high cost to workers and society at large. At the turn of the decade, record numbers of people globally believe that capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good. In Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada, around half the population believed this to be the case, with many feeling that the state was so enthralled to the market that it wasn't watching their backs or looking out for their needs. It's lonely to feel uncared for, invisible, and powerless in this way. The huge interventions governments made to support their citizens during 2020 were completely at odds with the economic ethos of the previous 40 years, embodied by comments made by Ronald Reagan in 1986. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help." Even if the various coronavirus stimuli do signal the dawning of a new approach, the long-term social and economic impact of neoliberalism will inevitably take a long time to unwind. I disagree with that. I don't think that actually needs to, but third, because it profoundly reshaped not only economic relationships, but also our relationships with each other. For neoliberal capitalism was never just an economic policy, as Margaret Thatcher made clear in 1981 when she told the Sunday Times, "Economics is the method, the object is to change the heart and soul." And in many ways, neoliberalism succeeded in this aim, for it fundamentally changed how we saw each other and the obligations to each other that we felt, with its valorizing of qualities such as hyper-competitiveness and the pursuit of self-interest, regardless of the wider consequences. It is not that humans are essentially selfish. Research in evolutionary biology makes clear that we are not. But with politicians actively championing a self-seeking dog-eat-dog mindset, and greed is good, the maxim Gordon Gekko famously uttered in 1987 movie Wall Street, serving as neoliberalism's bumper sticker, qualities such as solidarity, kindness, and caring for each other were not only undervalued, but deemed to be irrelevant human traits. Under neoliberalism, we were reduced to Homo economicus, rational humans consumed only by our own self-interest. We have even seen this play out in how our language has evolved. Collectivist words like belong, duty, share, and together have since the 1960s been increasingly supplanted by individualistic words and phrases such as achieve, own, personal, and special. Even pop song lyrics have become ever more individualistic over the past 40 years, as pronouns such as we and us have been replaced by I and me in this generation's lyrical imagination. In 1977, Queen told us that we are the champions, and Bowie that we could be heroes. In 2013, Kanye West told us, "I am God." While Ariana Grande's 2018 record-breaking "Thank You Next" was written as a love song to herself. It is not just in the West that we see this. When researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Singapore's Nanyang Business School analyzed China's 10 most popular songs every year from 1970 to 2010, they discovered that first-person pronouns such as I, me, and mine were increasingly used in songs over the decades, while uses of we, us, and ours diminished diminished. Even in a country traditionally defined by mass solidarity and collectivism, in which the state remains firmly in control, what we may think of as a super individualistic neoliberal mindset has firmly taken hold. That's what I try to explain to people when they see that in language, China is referred to as communist, but is in fact neoliberal and capitalist and in action. It's been like that for quite some time. Neoliberalism has made us see ourselves as competitors, not collaborators, consumers, not citizens, hoarders, not sharers, takers, not givers, hustlers, not helpers, people who are not only too busy to be there for our neighbors, but don't even know our neighbors' names. And we collectively let this happen. In many ways, this is a rational response. For under neoliberalism, if I am not for I, then who will be? The market? The state? Our employer? Our neighbor? Unlikely. The trouble is that in an all about me selfish society in which people feel that they have to take care of themselves because no one else will is inevitably a lonely one. It also fast becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. This is because in order not to feel lonely, we need to give as well as take, care as well as be cared for, be kind to each other and respectful of those around us, as well as be treated as such ourselves. If we are to come together in a world that's pulling apart, we will need to reconnect capitalism to the pursuit of the common good and put care, compassion, and cooperation at its very heart, with these behaviors extending to people who are different from us. Again, I have I have words about that I don't believe is possible, but that's the real challenge, to reconnect not only with those similar to us, but also with a much wider community to which we ultimately belong. They use post-COVID language, which I also don't agree with, but they say post-COVID-19, this is both more urgent than ever and more possible. The purpose of this book isn't solely to articulate the scale of the loneliness crisis in the 21st century, how we got here, and the ways that it will get worse if we do nothing to respond. It's also a call for action. To governments and business, for sure, loneliness has clear structural drivers that they must address, but also to each of us as individuals. Because society isn't only done to us, we do society too. We participate in it and shape it. So if we want to stop the destructive path of loneliness and restore the sense of community and cohesion we have lost, we will need to acknowledge that there are steps we must take, as well as trade-offs we will have to make, between individualism and collectivism, between self-interest and societal good, between anonymity and familiarity, between convenience and caring, between what is right for the self and what is best for the community, between liberty and fraternity. Choices that are not binary, yet will demand the relinquishing of at least some of the freedoms that neoliberalism promised, falsely, that we could have at no cost. The recognition that each of us has a critical role to play in mitigating the loneliness crisis is central to this book. Reconnecting society can not only be a top-down initiative driven by governments, institutions, and big business, even if the process of disconnecting society largely was. So throughout the book, I'll be including ideas, thoughts, and examples of what we can do to counter the current trajectory of divisiveness, isolation, and loneliness. Not only on a political and economic level, but on a personal one as well. This is the lonely century, but it doesn't have to be so. The future is in our hands. That was chapter 1. Also, thanks for the like, Katsuko. All right, I'm gonna get some water. I'm gonna use the bathroom. Maybe you grab some snacks. I'll be right back. Reminder, I started my Twitch like a little bit less than a week ago, and closed captions are available over there for everything that I'm saying. So check it out. Give me a follow. I'm trying to make it a whole thing. I'm excited because I've already got this many followers in like 6 days, which is like, I'm just so fucking grateful. So thank you so much to everyone that's already followed. I'm absolutely loving everything I'm doing with it so far. Doing readings, playing Stardew Valley, watching spooky little short stories. just talking about critical media ecology, read some poetry, all kinds of shit. If you have any suggestions, let me know. Like I said, I'm going to put a little be right back screen on, maybe grab a little coffee, and I'll see you in a bit. All right. Oh, what's up, Joseph? How's it going? Welcome, welcome. All right, we are reading a new book. I was like really considering whether or not to just like continue reading Susan Sontag's Illness is Metaphor because I loved it. But I decided instead we're going to read a book that I think is also relevant and easily like one of the most important books of just the last 3 years, as far as I can already tell. It does a really good job of building off of what we read on both TikTok Live for like the last couple weeks, but also Amy Lutkin's memoir that we just finished. The last couple chapters of that are available on my Twitch, and I'll export them onto my YouTube. But continuing, we're starting chapter 2 now. So let's get into it. It's chapter 2. Oh, and just in case anyone wasn't here before. So I am reading The Lonely Century by Norina Hertz. If you want to see a bigger view of it, got the whole Twitch setup going. But chapter 2 is called Loneliness Kills. So I'm like really, really excited about this chapter in particular because I think this perfectly builds off of everything that I just talked about. I'm curious to see if they cite some of the same people, but there's lots of work to be said about this, so let's get into it. My throat hurts. It's burning. It really hurts. I can't go to school. This is 1975. Bohemian Rhapsody is playing on the radio. Margaret Thatcher has recently become leader of the opposition. The Vietnam War has just ended, and this is my 6th bout of tonsillitis of the year. Again, my mother takes me to the doctor. Again, she feeds me Penbriton, the sickly sweet antibiotic with a candy floss cum aniseed taste. Again, she mashes up banana and grates me an apple, all I can eat with my burning throat. Again, I don't go to school. For me in 1975 is the year of constant sore throats and streaming noses, as well as repeated bouts of the flu. It's also the year that Sharon Potts rules the roost in my primary school. The year I felt the most isolated, excluded, alone. Every day I would sit on my own at break time, watching the other kids from across the playground as they skipped and played hopscotch, hoping they would ask me to join them. They never did. It may seem a stretch at first glance to connect how lonely I felt back then with my swollen glands and sandpapery throat, but it turns out that loneliness has corporeal manifestations, and the lonely body, as we will see in this chapter, is not a healthy one. Lonely bodies. Think back to the last time you felt lonely. It may have lasted for only a short time. What did it feel like in your body? Where did it live? We often imagine a lonely person as passive, quiet, muted. Indeed, when many of us remember the loneliest times in our lives, we don't immediately recall a hammering heart, racing thoughts, or other typical signs of high-stress situation. Loneliness instead evokes associations of stillness. Yet the chemical presence of loneliness in the body and the hormones it sends coursing through our veins are essentially identical to the fight or flight reaction we have when we feel under attack. It's this stress response that fuels some of the most insidious health effects of loneliness. These can be far-reaching and, even in the worst cases, deadly. What's up, Shelby Pie? I like the way you spell your name. We're reading The Lonely Century by Noreena Hertz. So when we're talking about loneliness, we are not just talking about lonely minds. Oh, thank you for that, by the way. But also lonely bodies. The two are, of course, intertwined. It's not that our bodies aren't used to stress responses. We experience them pretty frequently. A big presentation at work, a close call while cycling, watching our football team receive a penalty are all commonplace stress triggers. But typically after the threat is over, our vital signs, pulse, blood pressure, breathing, return to baseline. We're safe. In a lonely body, however, neither the stress response nor, crucially, the reset happens the way it should. When a lonely body experiences stress, cholesterol levels rise faster than a non-lonely one. Blood pressure rises faster, levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, rise faster. What's more, these momentary rises in blood pressure and cholesterol build up over time for those who are chronically lonely, with the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for those fight or flight responses, often keeping a danger signal going for far longer than it would otherwise. This leads to increased white blood cell production and inflammation, which in times of acute stress can be a powerful boost, but when sustained for longer periods of time, have devastating side effects. For when chronically inflamed, its immune system overworked and underperforming, the lonely body is susceptible to other illnesses that it would normally be much more capable of fighting, including the common cold, the flu, and my old nemesis from 1975, tonsillitis. It's also more prone to serious disease. If you're lonely, you have a 29% higher risk of coronary heart disease, a 32% higher risk of stroke, and so I don't know why. I think I probably gotta drink some water. Yeah, they talked about that in chapter 1. That's a good question. Hold on, let me read this real quick and then I'll speak to that. If you're lonely, you have a 29% higher risk of coronary heart disease, a 32% higher risk of stroke, and a 64% higher risk of developing clinical dementia. If you feel lonely or are socially isolated, you're almost 30% more likely to die prematurely than if you're not. So, no, you're okay, don't worry. So Shelby Pie asked, what if we're alone but not lonely? What is lonely? So, actually, if you catch the beginning, so we're on chapter 2 now, but the author talked a little bit about that in chapter 1. So she said, of course, that you can be around people but still feel lonely. And you know what, let me see if I don't remember, she didn't describe it in this little write-up over here. It's more, there was a 20-second, or not a 20-second, there's a 20 question scale that is traditionally used to define loneliness that she went over. What's up, Lady Fox? but she said hers is a bit different, including the entire context of being left out politically, like not feeling seen or that your needs are being met by your government or your overall structure. And she approaches it from a neoliberal critique. Yeah, so like the traditional scale is more so involving like feeling personally seen and heard or that you have someone to turn to. But she expands on that into a neoliberal critique. So the way that neoliberalism is it so the main aspect of neoliberalism that I'm often speaking to is hyper individuality. So it's the idea that basically it's the dog eat dog mentality, the competitiveness, stuff like that. So she spoke to the way that, of course, the philosophic and economic model of neoliberalism doesn't have it's like inherently opposed to our ability to feel seen and a member of a community. Yeah, I feel that, Shelby. I've basically been alone for the entire pandemic, so I feel that. Yeah, an auto clicker would be good probably, but we'll see. Maybe one day. All right, let's continue. Although the longer we are lonely, the more damaging the impact on our health. Even relatively short periods of loneliness can negatively impact our well being. When a team at Johns Hopkins University ran a study in the 1960s and 1970s that tracked a cohort of medical students for 16 years, the subject group showed a revealing pattern. The studies whose childhoods had been lonely, their parents cold and aloof, were more likely to develop various cancers later in life. While a 2010 study of people who had experienced a period of loneliness brought about by a specific event, like the death of a partner or a move to a new town, found that even though their loneliness was time bounded, in this case lasting less than 2 years, their life expectancy was diminished. Given the enforced period of isolation most of us experience in 2020, this rings alarm bells. We will come back to why loneliness wreaks such havoc on our bodies, but first let's consider what it is in many ways the antithesis of loneliness, community, and its impact on our health. For if loneliness makes us sick, does feeling connected to others keep us well? The Haredi health puzzle. Here, let me take my allergy pill real quick. I think I don't know what an auto clicker is. So, actually, I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you're talking about for TikTok likes. So, for the same sort of reasons that I critique neoliberalism on TikTok, I'm always hesitant to ask anyone to do likes or to like do, I don't know. It feels very much like I'm asking people to be robots to like help me get the word out. And as much as, of course, I do believe that this research is important and that everyone should know about it, hence why I'm reading it. um, it feels wrong to be asking people to do like a form of emotional labor that ultimately helps me, I don't know, get out there more. I don't want people to feel obligated to do that, so I'm never going to ask people to do that, but of course, if you would like to help, that is appreciated. But yeah, that's a good idea, probably. Always appreciated, never expected. All right. The Haredi health puzzle. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that exists. Oh, I think I missed your comment, Shelby. Oh, it's a robot. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I kind of figured that kind of stuff might be like not allowed. I have no idea though. All right, the Haredi health puzzle. Buttery, creamy, salty, sweet. The rugelach melts in my mouth, as does my first bite of Serbo, a traditional Jewish Hungarian cake, layered with chocolate, walnuts, and apricot jam. Sorry if anyone Jewish Hungarian, I'm probably butchering the fuck out of that. I'm actually mostly Hungarian, so it's surprising I've never heard of this. I'm at Katz Bakery in Israel's Bnei Brak, one of the most popular stops on Haredi food tours. The Haredim are an ultra-Orthodox branch of Judaism whose origins go back to the late 19th century. Today, this black-hatted, white-shirted, modest-dressing community make up approximately 12% of Israel's population, a figure projected to rise to 16% by 2030. I find all the pastries at Katz utterly delicious. Yet these delicacies are definitely not healthy. Indeed, all the butter, sugar, and fat help explain why the Haredim are 7 times more likely to be obese than secular Jewish Israelites. Again, I could have sworn I saw most recent research that says it disconnects that claim, so like, know that as I'm reading this, I don't know if I agree. I feel like I've heard that be debunked. But yeah, it looks like my legs are frozen at 1K for me, so I don't know. Alright. Indeed, all the butter, sugar, and fat help explain why the Haredim are 7 times more likely to be obese than secular Jewish Israelites. When I ask Penny, the jocular Haredi Jew who runs my tour, about how much vegetable and fiber is in the traditional Haredi diet, he tells me it is limited. Their diet isn't the only unhealthy aspect of their lifestyle. Despite living in a country that has an average of 288 days of sunshine a year, this group is seriously deprived of vitamin D. Their modest dress code means that barely a wrist gets any sun exposure. As for physical exercise, anything vigorous tends to be avoided. By all standard modern accounts, Pini and his peers clearly do not live healthy lives, nor are they financially secure. Most men opt out of the workforce to study the Torah, and although 63% of Haredi women do have a job, often as their family's breadwinners, they tend to work fewer hours than non-Orthodox women do due to their considerable responsibilities at home. The average Haredi woman has 6.7 children, 3 more than the national Israeli average. They also typically work in roles such as teaching, where the pay is relatively low. As a result, over 54% of Haredim live below the poverty line, compared to 9% of non-Haredi Jews. Their average monthly per capita income, 3,500 shekels, is also half that of their less religious Jewish counterparts. Given all these indicators, one would expect Haredim to have a shorter life expectancy than that of the general Israeli population. After all, the overwhelming majority of studies around the world show a clear positive correlation between diet and longevity, physical activity and longevity, and socioeconomic status and longevity. Yet fascinatingly, the Haredim seem to buck this trend. 73.6% of Haredim describe their health as very good, compared with only 50% of other groups. This is a statistic we might be tempted to disregard as self-reported and wishful thinking if it weren't for the fact that their life expectancy is indeed higher than average. The 3 cities in which the majority of Israel's Haredim live, Beit Shemesh, Bnei Brak, and Jerusalem, are all outliers when it comes to life expectancy. In Bnei Brak, whose population is 96% Haredi, the life expectancy at birth is a full 4 years higher than the city's socioeconomic ranking would predict. Overall, Haredi men in these cities live 3 years longer, and women nearly 18 months longer than one would expect. Other studies have found that they also score higher on self-reported measures of life satisfaction than either secular or moderately observant Israeli Jews or Arab Israelis. Now, of course, it could be that this community, many of whom hail from the same shtils in Poland and Russia, and most of whom intermarry, share a particular genetic makeup that predisposes them to good health. But in fact, the limitation of a gene pool over time is much more likely to lead to genetic disorders than to population longevity. Oh, it's, or what kind of record do you mean? Oh, I mean, I'll be reading basically whenever I get the call to. I'm also especially reading on Thursdays though on my Twitch. Check the schedule. Now, of course, it could be that this community, oh wait, I just read that. One might also assume that the Haredim are healthier because of their faith, given the multiple studies suggesting that their religious belief pays a health dividend. However, it is less the belief itself and more their participation in the associated community that is thought to yield this result. As one much cited study suggests, it is attending religious services, not simply identifying as religious, that may add a whopping 7 years to life expectancy. Community, the value of which was so repudiated by neoliberal capitalism's focus on individualism and self-interest, seems to have a health benefit of its very own. And for the Haredim, community is everything. This close-knit group spends virtually all their waking hours together praying, volunteering, studying, and working. Their year is punctuated with holy days and festivals around which the community coalesces. At Sukkot, families welcome guests into their sukkahs, the palm leaf roof temporary structures in which they sleep and eat for a week. At Purim, the streets throng with costumed revelers, the vibe a combination of Mardi Gras and Halloween. That sounds fucking awesome. At Hanukkah, neighbors, friends, and neighbors' friends join to light the menorah and eat jam donuts. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, and funerals draw crowds of people together for days at a time. And of course, every Friday evening, throngs of grandchildren, cousins, second cousins, and in-laws gather around the dining room table to bread break and bring in the Sabbath together. The Haredim don't only pray together and play together, however. In times of crisis or need, they also provide each other with tangible help and support. Whether it's childcare, meals, transportation to medical appointments, advice, even financial aid if need be, they are there for each other when times are tough and life a struggle. As such, it's no surprise that only 11% of Haredim report feeling lonely, compared with 23% of the total Israeli population. Dov Chernovsky, professor of health economics and policy at Ben-Gurion University in Israel's Negev desert, has been studying the Haredim for a number of years. He believes that while faith plays a role in the Haredim's above-average life expectancy, their strong familial and community bonds play a more critical one. Loneliness shortens life and friendship reduces pressure, the professor succinctly puts it. For the Haredim, the care and support they provide one another may indeed be the secret to their longer and healthier lives. The health benefits of community. The Haredim are not the exception in this regard. The benefits of community to health were first identified back in the 1950s in the small town of Roseto, Pennsylvania, when the local physicians noticed that residents were experiencing a much lower rate of heart disease than that found in a similar neighboring town. Upon further investigation, they found that Roseton men over 65 were dying at a rate that was half the national average, even though they were working grueling jobs at nearby quarries, smoking unfiltered cigarettes, eating large soaked meatballs, and downing wine daily. Why? Researchers concluded that it was the rock-solid family ties and community support of the predominantly Italian-American Rosetons that were delivering the superior health dividend. A follow-up study in 1992, which looked at a full 50 years of Roseton health and social records, found even more evidence for this thesis. By then, the death rate in Roseto had climbed back up to the average due to the erosion of traditionally cohesive family and community relationships from the late 1960s and later. As the wealthiest among them started to display their riches in ever more ostentatious ways, as local stores closed down due to the arrival of larger big box stores out of town, and as single-family homes with fenced yards sprang up to replace the multi-generational living setups, so did the productive health benefits of their community dissipate. The nuclear family. It's gonna kill us. Other examples of cohesive communities protecting their members' health include the lifetime residents of Sardinia and Japan's Okinawa Island, as well as the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. Their geographies are known as blue zones, places where it is not only diet that accounts for the especially long life expectancy, but also the fact that social ties are strong and enduring. Places like Nye Brock or Roseto in the 1950s were, as Dan Buettner, the National Geographic fellow who coined the term, has said, you can't walk outside your front door without bumping into somebody you know. It's important not to overly romanticize community. By definition, communities are exclusive, and such can be both excessively insular and antagonistic towards outsiders. Often they don't permit difference or nonconformity, whether we're talking different interests, non-traditional family structures, or alternative beliefs or lifestyles. But in the case of the Haredim and Seventh-day Adventists, for example, those who don't adhere to the community's norms can find that excommunication can be both brutal and brutally swift. I don't know about y'all, but I love learning about cults and stuff, and that really like brings an extra edge to that too, like the loss of that. Yet for those within the enclave, community clearly does deliver a health dividend. This stems not only from the practical support that community offers or the reassurance provided by knowing that somebody has your back, but also from something more fundamental that originates in our deep evolutionary past, the fact that we are hardwired not to be alone. Creatures of togetherness. I'm also a big critic, though, of describing the body as wired. Like, the main argument in my diss is that there's been a mechanization of humans and that we have grown to believe the body is a machine and can be described as such, and that has consequences if taken too literally. Like all other primates, humans are social animals. We rely on complex, tight-knit groups to function, from the primordial chemical bonds between mother and infant to the larger family unit to today's massive nation-states. Indeed, in some ways, the rise of humans to the top of Earth's planetary food chain can be traced to our enthusiastic togetherness. From our development of sophisticated group hunting and gathering techniques for food to our collective defense strategies for protection. What's up? Oh my God, Ryan, is that you? It's nice to see you. I started a Twitch like earlier this week. I'm so glad to see you succeeding, so fuck yeah. Until very recently, in the history of our species, a lonely human would have been quite literally at risk of death, vulnerable in a world where the group enabled survival. I completely agree, Ezra. Yeah, totally. Being connected to others is our natural and, in fact, desired state, whether this desire is conscious or not. No, I mean, I completely agree, and the research I do definitely, like, triangulates that. This is why not being connected to each other has such a profound negative impact on our health. For in order to de-incentivize us from remaining in a state fundamentally at odds with our survival, evolution has equipped our bodies with a biological reaction to being alone that ramps up our alertness and is so physiologically and psychologically unpleasant that we're motivated to end it as quickly as possible. In some ways, our ability to feel lonely, our pain and agitation when we feel distant from other human beings, is a brilliant evolutionary feature. You would never want to shut off the trigger of loneliness, said the University of Chicago's Professor John Casipio. Oh, he was quoted in the last book we read too, or at least Amy Lutkin's The Lonely Hunter. One of the pioneers of loneliness research. Well, there you go. It would be like completely shutting down hunger. You'd lack the signals to eat. Yet in today's world, so different from landscape, in which our ancestors evolved this trigger, it can seem like more of a bug than a positive design feature. For as Professor Anton Emanuel at University College Hospital in London explained to me, the stress response triggered by loneliness is like putting a car into first gear. It's the most efficient way to accelerate, and it gets you moving. But when you stay in first gear for your entire journey, or worse, for a number of journeys, the engine will be over-revved, strained, and damaged. A car isn't designed to stay in first gear, just as our bodies are not designed to be repeatedly lonely. Is it any surprise, then, that bodies exposed to this kind of stress again and again start to show signs of physical damage? The eminent 18th century Scottish physician William Cullen was one of the first doctors to link loneliness to illness. One of his patients, Mrs. Ray, suffered from a mysterious ailment from which he prescribed cocoa, horse riding, tincture of Mars, and most significant for our purposes, company. I think I have whatever she has. I'll have what she's having. However averse she should see her friends both at home and abroad, he counseled, silence and solitude are to be avoided. By now, the health benefit of good relationships has been established in a number of research projects. In the famous Harvard study of adult development, 238 male Harvard sophomores were tracked by researchers for over 80 years, from 1938 on. They measured the amount of exercise they did, how their marriages and careers developed, and ultimately their lifespans. The original recruits included future U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Washington Post editor Ben Bradlee, later immortalized by Tom Hanks in the movie The Post. It turned out that those who were healthiest at 80 were the ones who had been the most satisfied with their relationships 30 years before. This benefit wasn't restricted to those who had the privilege of attending Harvard in the 1930s. It was reflected, too, in a more diverse group of inner-city Boston residents who were tracked alongside for as long. I know, right? Yeah, I also have that condition. I need cocoa and horse riding and to hang out with my friends. As Robert Waldinger, the study's current director, noted, taking care of your body is important. Yeah, cocoa, horseback riding, and hang out with your friends? You mean lesbianism? Precisely. Happy 4th day of Pride, by the way. Taking care of your body is important, but tending to your relationships is a form of self-care too. That, I think, is the revelation. We can distinguish, of course, between poor relationships and loneliness, as was highlighted earlier. Loneliness is not only a reflection of how connected to other individuals we feel, but also of how connected we feel to groups of people, institutions, and society as a whole. Yeah, definitely. So it's the seaside outfit flavor of lesbianism. I dig that. Yet what is emerging from hundreds of medical studies is that while community and connectedness provide health benefits, loneliness, even when most narrowly defined, can take a dangerous toll. Your name is The Underground Scene and you approve this message. The question is therefore, is loneliness simply one of many sources of stress in our lives, each contributing to a decline in our physical health, or is there something particular to the stress caused by loneliness that engenders profound long-term health problems? The answer seems to lie somewhere in between. On the one hand, the lonely body is a stressed body, a body that is easily exhausted and overly inflamed. Not that inflammation is inherently bad. In regular amounts, it is in fact beneficial, part of the body's defense mechanism against infection and injury, designed to localize any damage and help the body to heal. Indeed, without inflammation, typically characterized by swelling and redness, healing itself would be impossible. The problem lies in the fact that normally inflammation dies down when the pathogenic threat is mitigated, or when the injury has healed. But with loneliness, especially chronic loneliness, there's no off switch to remind the body to calm down. That has profound implications for latent life autists that especially have histamine reactions and mast cell. But with loneliness, especially, yeah, we already said that. Okay. So loneliness-induced inflammation can become chronic, the new normal. And chronic inflammation has been linked to a whole host of afflictions, including clogged arteries, heart disease, stroke, depression, arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, and cancer. Indeed, a 2012 review of the medical literature on the subject found that chronic inflammation, long associated with infectious disease, is now also intimately linked with a broad range of non-infectious diseases, adding alarmingly, perhaps even all of them. It makes sense with what we know of inflammation. On the other hand, loneliness is a type of stress that can massively amplify the effects of other stresses. Take the immune system, for example. A healthy body uses a variety of mechanisms to fight malevolent forces, whether they're pathogens, bacteria, and viruses, or cancerous cells. Loneliness has been shown to reduce the efficacy of the body's fight against both types of threat. It makes us weaker and more susceptible to disease, especially viruses. Moreover, it's not just keeping us in a sustained state of high alert, the equivalent of the car that's been driving for 8 hours in first gear, that loneliness damages our immune system. It affects us on a cellular and hormonal level, too. One influential study has suggested that loneliness impairs the function in several endocrine glands that secrete hormones throughout the body and are connected with our immune response. UCLA's Steve Cole, professor of medicine and psychiatry, meanwhile, has found that the blood of lonely people has a significantly higher level of the hormone norepinephrine, which, in a life-threatening situation, starts to shut down viral defense. Such immune weakening extends to cancer, which the body usually defends against in part by using natural killer NK cells that destroy tumors and virus-infected cells. A study of first-year medical students has shown NK cell activity to be much lower among the lonelier members of the cohort. Just as loneliness seems to contribute to various conditions, if you're already unwell, loneliness is also likely to impede your recovery. As Professor Emanuel told me, I am 100% unequivocal that loneliness impacts health and recovery. If a lonely patient and non-lonely patient receive the same treatment, the non-lonely one will do better. In the same way that a smoker being treated for Crohn's disease will do worse than a non-smoker, so too will a lonely patient versus someone who is not. The data backs this up. For instance, in socially isolated patients, blood pressure and in men, cholesterol takes longer to return to normal following a stressful incident, while a lonely person's reduced ability to reset the body's inflammation levels after events like strokes, heart attacks, and surgery is thought to be a leading factor in why isolated elderly people have lower life expectancy on average than those who have regular social contact. As Helen Stokes Lampard, chair of the Royal College of General Practitioners, put it in the group's 2017 annual conference, social isolation and loneliness are akin to a chronic long-term condition in terms of the impact they have on our patients' health and well-being. This has an incredible implication on just like anyone socialized to not express themselves emotionally. Looking at you, just cis men in general, like the amount of just long-term health impacts of repressed emotion is overwhelming, and especially anything that teaches you you can't be like yourself authentically around other people. Alone, alone, all alone. Of course, it is not just our bodies that loneliness ravages. My soul in agony, said Coleridge's Ancient Mariner of how it felt to be alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide, wide sea. Absolutely, yeah. Everyone, of course, but I think it's definitely it's gendered for sure. I mean, as everything is, as well as, of course, racialized and all other demographics. Loneliness can also cause serious mental anguish and pain. Indeed, literature is populated with lonely people who are also depressed or mentally ill, from the unnamed protagonist of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's 1892 short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, who, as a result of being confined to a single room for a slight hysterical tendency, itself now a debunked condition, slowly develops hallucinatory delusions to Eleanor Elephant of Gail Honeyman's Epiness, Costa Award-winning 2017 novel, whose loneliness both compounds itself and frustrates her recovery from a traumatic past. Rather astonishingly, however, it's only in the past decade or so that loneliness has begun to be extensively researched within the field of psychiatric medicine as a distinct psychological experience. As such, despite not being classified as a mental health problem in its own right, it is now a recognized correlate for a host of mental illnesses, including anxiety and depression. The relationship runs both ways. A 2012 study of over 7,000 adults in England concluded that those with depression were over 10 times more likely to be lonely than those who were not depressed. While a landmark U.S. study that tracked participants for 5 years found that patients who initially reported loneliness were more likely 5 years later to be depressed than those who did not. The relationship between loneliness and mental illness is a complex one that we are only starting to understand. Yet it seems to be the case that loneliness and isolation can accelerate genetic or circumstantial depressive tendencies, in part because of their physiological impact. We sleep less when we're lonely, for example, and a lack of sleep can trigger depressive symptoms. So too can the symptoms of depression themselves fuel loneliness by making it harder for the depressed person to connect. It can be the chicken and the egg. The same is true of anxiety, for which the isolation can be both a symptom and a cause. Social anxiety has made my world so much smaller, says Alex, a teenager in the United Kingdom with social anxiety disorder. As it got worse, I started to get more insular. The more intense it got, the more I started to feel very lonely and isolated. I would avoid going to shops or getting the bus during rush hour because there were too many people. The longer it went on, the more it started to affect work, close relationships, and friendships. So my social life has, well, I don't really have one. Even short periods of isolation, such as we collectively experienced during the coronavirus pandemic, can have a marked impact on mental health. Sometimes the effect is still apparent years down the line. Researchers found that healthcare workers in Beijing who had been quarantined during the 2003 SARS outbreak were more likely to be suffering serious depression 3 years later than those who had not been, even though SARS quarantine periods lasted typically less than a month, often less than 2 weeks. Separate studies, also among hospital employees in Beijing, found that 3 years after the SARS outbreak, alcoholism was higher among those who had been quarantined than those who were not, with significant numbers still suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, their symptoms including hypervigilance, nightmares, and flashbacks. Such findings should be taken very seriously as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. Again, I don't agree. It's not over, and anyone disabled knows that. Both governments and we as individuals must be mindful of the likely long-term mental health impacts of our recent forced isolation, and politicians must commit sufficient resources to addressing the fallout. At the extreme, loneliness can lead to unaliving. Francie Hart Broghammer, chief psychiatry resident at the UC Irvine Medical Center, recently wrote movingly of two patients she had encountered for whom loneliness had made life feel not worth living. I know, yeah, emerge. It's like, well, I don't know. One was a young woman she had recently treated who had intentionally severed her airway and spinal cord with an 8-inch, so obviously trigger warning for self-harm, with an 8-inch kitchen knife in an attempt to take her own life. In interviews, she cited the isolation associated with caring for her ill grandmother and the paucity of individuals with whom she could meaningfully discuss such challenges as the cause of her despair. The other was Mr. White, a 38-year-old old man with unaliving ideations, whose parents had recently died. He was struggling with employment and finances, had been rejected by his siblings, had no close friends, and was now houseless. It was the loss of his dog, his one remaining companion, that seemed to have tipped him over the edge. Of his pet, Mr. White said, "She was the only thing in this world that viewed me as someone worth loving." That's the saddest shit ever. "I sleep in the park, and everyone that walks by thinks I am worse than a stray. I am subhuman. No one cares about you when you're in a situation like mine. Except for her, she cared for me, and my whole life's purpose was to care for her in return." I know, yeah, big, big oof. The large X. Hello, supersized oof, please. Now she is gone, and I have nothing left in this world. Unfortunately, Dr. Brogheimer treats patients like this far too often. Her first-hand insights into the link between loneliness and unaliving are borne out by the research. There are over 130 studies that have found a link between loneliness and unaliving ideation, or self-harm. It is a link that holds true among all age groups, including the young. A survey of more than 5,000 U.S. middle school pupils found that adolescents who professed a high degree of loneliness were twice as likely as those who didn't to have unaliving thoughts. Such findings are corroborated by research on young adults in places as far afield as Kenya, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. I'm sorry, I butchered that. A reminder that loneliness is not only a phenomena in the developed world. Furthermore, these effects can, once again, manifest many years later. One study found that unaliving thoughts in 15-year-olds were closely correlated to their self-reported loneliness 8 years later, that is, at the age of 7. Given the high levels of loneliness among children and teenagers, this is especially concerning. What is important to understand here is that the loneliness that prompts such depths of despair can stem from a wide range of circumstances. From the feelings of social exclusion experienced by a child ostracized on the playground or on social media, through the feelings of social isolation an elderly person who has not had any visitors for a month may experience, to the feelings of social isolation that an adult whose community has crumbled and support system has broken down is likely to feel. A person like Mr. White. Indeed, in the United States, and to a lesser degree in the United Kingdom, those places where we've seen a spike in what are known as deaths of despair in recent years, deaths resulting from drug overdose, alcoholism, or unaliving of predominantly working class middle aged men, are typically those where traditional social support structures have collapsed. These men are more likely to be divorced, less likely to attend church, and more likely to have lost the brotherhood of the trade union or workplace because they have become unemployed or are doing precarious, non-unionized, and transient work. Thanks for the follow. I eat world peace. I gotta, I swear I turned that down. It's like so, like, I turned it down, but my volume is still blaring. All right. This is why, despite Big Pharma's keenness to develop a loneliness pill, and indeed one that seeks to reduce perceived loneliness, is currently being tested, as are various compounds that seek to counteract some of loneliness's physiological impacts, we must do more than just try to treat its symptoms, or even worse, attempt to simply to dull them. My thoughts exactly. Thank you too. Thanks for being here. The root causes of loneliness must be addressed, with an understanding that solutions will need to be political, economic, and of course societal rather than simply pharmaceutical. Yeah, my thoughts exactly. Like we can't band-aid a problem like this if it's so clearly structural. Like and we must take hope and encouragement from the fact that solutions are possible. For while broken communities lead to lonely and potentially unhealthy lives, as we've seen, the converse also holds. As Edgar says in King Lear, the mind much sufferance doth o'erskip, when grief hath mates and bearing fellowship. Even fleeting positive connections with others have a significant health impact. Just the presence of a friend in a stressful situation has been associated with calmer physiological responses, such as the lowering of blood pressure and cortisol levels. This is why in my work I focus on the algorithmic age, because it truly, like, and as much as it can be toxic, having algorithmic spaces, especially honestly, like TikTok and like Twitch, which is why I'm here trying to share this information in these spaces, because I believe it truly is like a really special and wholesome thing that especially has taken off during since COVID started. Like it really is. It's a life-saving thing for many of us. What if actual change, but instead capitalism? That was hilarious, Kat. Oh, don't worry. Yeah, no, you don't have to apologize for not talking too much. I'm gay. I'm just happy. Like just chill. Yeah, you don't have to. You definitely don't need to feel obligated to like make any comments or anything. As I'm reading, it's harder for me to keep up with them anyway. So yeah, I know it's so important. I mean, we got to get real with how we can make sure that we can care for ourselves and each other. So yeah, it's so true. Holding hands with a loved one can provide. I can never say this word. The one where it's like you dull the pain. Anesthetic. There we go. Yeah, that's right. Oh, cool. All right. Yeah, you're welcome either way. An anesthetic effect that's comparable to taking a painkiller. While recent research into aging has found that even maintaining relatively weak ties with others when we're elderly, playing in a casual bridge club, exchanging holiday cards, chatting with the postman may provide a significant bulwark against memory loss and dementia. Yeah, good. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's what I want this to be, Just like chilling out, learning stuff. Our health, it seems, is molded not only by community and a feeling of being connected to others, but also by kindness. The kindness of friends and family, colleagues, employers, and neighbors, but also the kindness of strangers. As we rebuild our post COVID-19 world again, come on, get real. What's up? We need to remember this. And also how under neoliberal capitalism, kindness became a currency that we collectively devalued. That's the realist. The helper's high. Yeah. That's a really common thing from what I've heard, Kat. And I mean, they spoke to that already for sure. I saw that in my own research about like just general social relations during COVID too. It makes sense that being on the receiving end of kindness and care both makes us feel less alone and has health benefits. But what is less obvious is that being kind and caring and doing small acts for others without expecting anything in return has a similar effect. There's a significant body of research that backs up the idea that helping others is good for our health, especially if you have direct contact with the person you're helping. In the early 2000s, researchers sent questionnaires to 2016 members of the Presbyterian Church across the United States, inquiring about the participants' religious habits, their physical and mental health, and their experience of giving and receiving help. Even after gender, stressful life events, and general health were accounted for, those participants were consistently involved in giving help through volunteering, community activities, and caring for a loved one experienced significantly better mental health. A number of other studies have similarly found that helping others directly has a health benefit, both mental and physical. Veterans suffering from PTSD show reduced symptoms after caring for their grandchildren. Looking after children at a nursery school reduced the levels of cortisol and epinephrine, another stress hormone, in the saliva of elderly volunteers. When adolescents provide help to others, their rates of depression tend to go down. And in one study carried out by the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, researchers found that people who provided no help to others, logistically or emotionally, were more than twice as likely to die in the 5 years of the study versus people who were in caring roles, whether for a partner, a relative, a neighbor, or a friend. Think of Charles Dickens' Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, whose transformation from a miserly curmudgeon into a generous benefactor renders him both happy and healthy by the story's end. When we help another person, provided that our motivation is not resentment or obligation, we experience a positive physiological reaction. It's why helpers often experience what's known as the helper's high, feelings of energy, strength, warmth, and calm. What this suggests is that in the lonely century, it is essential not only that people feel cared for, and indeed are cared for, but also that they have the opportunity to care for others. So how do we make sure that everyone has the capacity to both give and receive help and care? This solution is partly structural. For it's much easier to be helpful to others when you're not working all hours and feeling exhausted. It's much easier to volunteer if you're not juggling multiple jobs or if your employer has given you time off to do so. Hear, hear. We're going to cheers to that one. Yes, 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 yes. Tell me about it. There are steps the state and employers can and must do in this regard. The Scooby-Doo villain is always capitalism. It's true. We cannot allow current economic circumstances to stymie this. In the same way that in the United States after the Great Depression and in the United Kingdom after the Second World War, workers were given more rights and protections, and a greater commitment was made to the safeguarding of citizens' welfare. We need to see the coronavirus pandemic as an opportunity to develop new structures and ways of behavior that enable us to better help each other. My nose was itchy. There's also a cultural shift that's needed. Care, kindness, and compassion need to be traits we're actively encourage in each other and more clearly reward. Thanks for the follow, Nick Garris one. There we go, we lowered it finally where it's not incredibly alarming. In recent decades, they've been underappreciated and underpaid. A search on a leading job website in January 2020 revealed that job descriptions specifying kindness paid only around half the average wage. Moving forward, we must ensure that kindness and compassion are accorded the value they deserve, their worth not left solely to the market to determine. The collapse for careers that echoed, or for carers. Look at that Freudian slip capitalism has in my brain. The collapse for carers that echoed across the world in the spring of 2020 must be translated into something tangible and permanent. For the sake of our physical as well as our mental health, and as we will see, for our future security, we need to ensure that we come together as a cohesive community and retain the benefits of social contact. Oh, well, have fun. That sounds great. And it's a beautiful day. At least it is by me. I hope it's a beautiful day for you too. Have a good day, okay? I'll probably see you later, Joseph. Thanks for again for always like stopping by. You're so supportive. All right, that was chapter 2. I think we're going to read one more at least. I'm like feeling real good. Like I slept in today. I stayed up late. I slept in today. And I feel like this is exactly what I needed. I hope y'all are enjoying the read. It's like really good. It's like it's just so useful. And I think it's very cathartic just learning about like how much research there really is, cuz I honestly don't talk enough about this. Like even though this is a main focus of my work, like it's like the driving factor, and it's something that isn't just, of course, like none of my work is something that I don't experience firsthand, basically. So this is a very personal and political decision as a researcher for me to pursue, and know that I never read any of this lightly. And so if you're experiencing any of it, know that I am in solidarity with you. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Lady Fox. We love a good sleep. That's true. Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. I know. And like I said, I made that TikTok about it earlier. Like, I feel like I haven't had this sleep schedule in so long, and it makes sense because I was teaching an 8:30 class, so I had to like rearrange my sleep schedule and stuff. But like, I mean, it's a privilege for me to even be able to do this just because of the summer. Like a privilege in a way that like I may or may not be able to afford rent in August and September, but it actually still allows me to like live on a natural sleep schedule for the first time in all year, basically. All right, but yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it. This is for anyone that's come in. It is called The Lonely Century, and it's a book by Narina Hertz. If you want to see the bigger view, I am reading it. The look of this, like me in this little square, is on my Twitch. I started it a little bit less than a week ago, and I'm super grateful to all the support I've already gotten. So thanks, y'all. We are on chapter 3. This one's called The Lonely Mouse, and it goes like this. White hair, pink nose, tail. The mouse is 3 months old. He's been in his cage for 4 weeks in a period of enforced solitude, but today he will get a visitor. Thank you for the follow, Exploding Goldfish. Exploding Goldfish, what a good one. Yeah, this one's going to hurt. I know. You just know. I'm already so sad for this little mouse. Like, oh, let me everyone brace your heart. Like, today he will get a visitor, though. A new mouse enters his cage. Our mouse sizes him up. There's an initial pattern of exploratory activity, as the researchers running this trial will put it. Oh no! Then suddenly, our mouse makes a startling move. He stands on his back legs, rattles his tail, and aggressively bites the intruder, wrestling him to the ground. Mouses be cool. Mises? That's probably not what they're called, I forget. The ensuing fight, brutal, violent, and prompted simply by the introduction of another mouse, is videotaped by the researchers. They have seen this play out before. In almost all cases, the longer a mouse is isolated, the more aggressive it is to the newcomer. So mice, once isolated, turn on each other. But is this truth about mice true too of men? Could today's loneliness crisis, exacerbated by weeks and months of social isolating and lockdown, not only be turning us on ourselves but also against each other? Could loneliness not only be damaging our health but also making the world a more aggressive, angry place? Of mice and men. There are now numerous scientific studies that link loneliness in humans to feelings of hostility towards others. In part, this stems from an initial defensive act, a stepping back, as Jacqueline Olds, professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, explains it. Lonely people will often put up a protective shell that denies the need for human warmth and company. Consciously or not, they start to send out signals, often nonverbal ones, telling other people to leave me by myself. I don't need you. Go away. There's also something else at play, something that loneliness does to our brains. Several researchers have found a link between loneliness and reduced levels of empathy, the ability to put oneself in the position of others, to understand their perspective or their pain. This is reflected not just in behavior, but also in brain activity. Multiple studies have now shown that in the brains of lonely people, the level of activation of the temporal parietal junction, the part of the brain most closely linked with empathy, decreases when confronted with the suffering of others, whereas in the non-lonely it rises. At the same time, the lonely person's visual cortex, the part of the brain that typically processes alertness, attention, and vision, is stimulated. What this means is that lonely people typically react more quickly, by several milliseconds in fact, to the suffering of others, but the response is attentive, not perspectival. Just as the lonely body ramps up its stress response, the lonely mind, anxious and hyper-alert, operates in terms of self-preservation, scanning the surroundings for threats rather than trying to see things from the affected person's point of view. Have you ever taken a walk in the woods and jumped back because you saw a stick on the ground and thought it was a snake? Asked Dr. Stephen Casipio, the director of the University of Chicago's Brain Dynamics Laboratory. The lonely mind sees snakes all the time. I'm curious how this research pairs with late in life realized autists and the theory of mind that's been debunked because it's trash. To be determined. More recently, researchers have also found this, that loneliness doesn't only impact how we see the world, but also how we categorize it. A 2019 study carried out at King's College London asked 2018-year-olds to describe the friendliness of their local neighborhood. They also asked the participants' siblings the same question. In short, the lonelier siblings perceive their neighborhoods as less friendly, less cohesive, and less trustworthy than the brother or sister who suffered less from feelings of isolation. Loneliness, then, is not simply an individual state. In the words of Professor John Casipio, it operates in part by shaping what people expect and think about other people. Anger, hostility, a propensity to perceive one's environment as threatening and uncaring, diminished empathy, loneliness can engender a dangerous combination of emotions with profound implications for us all. This reminds me of those, what's that app called? Where you're like the neighborhood watch apps and surveillance capitalism, the way that it profits off of that. Because that's definitely not a coincidence. In the same way that the loneliness is being fueled by the generation of data and selling our eyes, that's all definitely influencing the same culture. Anger, hostility, yeah, I read that already. For the loneliness crisis is playing out not only at the doctor's office, but also at the ballot box, with consequences for democracy that are deeply troubling for those of us who believe in a society based on unity, inclusiveness, and tolerance. Oh, wait, yeah, I did read that, okay. I was second guessing myself. I keep using those snitch apps to report police cars parked inappropriately. I love that. That's praxis. This is because for democracy to function well, by which I mean to fairly reconcile the interests of different groups while ensuring all citizens' needs and grievances are heard, two sets of ties need to be strong. Those that connect the state with the citizen, and those that connect citizens to each other. When these bonds of connectivity break down, excuse me, when people feel they can't trust or rely upon each other and are disconnected, whether emotionally, economically, socially, or culturally, When people don't believe the state is looking out for them and feel marginalized or abandoned, not only does society fracture and polarize, but people lose faith in politics itself. Hence why I argue, since the nation's origin, it's been this way. It's now taking new form, which of course, again, surveillance capitalism profits off of. This is where we find ourselves today. The ties that connect us to each other and to the state have been fraying in this lonely century because a growing number of people feel isolated and alienated, disconnected both from their fellow citizens and from mainstream politicians who they feel have not been listening to them or looking out for their interests. While this has been the trend for some time, the danger is that the pandemic will exacerbate it. Economic hardship risks creating deeper disenfranchisement with our political leaders, especially if it is perceived to be inequitably shouldered, while the fear of catching COVID-19 risks making many of us fearful of our fellow citizens in a very visceral physical way. This should concern us all because, as we've seen in recent times, such conditions provide fertile ground for exploitation by politicians at the extremes, populists with an ear finely tuned to people's disaffection and an appetite to exploit it for political gain. Which is why I keep reminding people that eugenics fuels fascism, because that's why. Because if you're not looking out and you deem certain people subhuman or you equate them to disease or filth, turns out you're dehumanizing them, and then fascism is more easily to take hold on the basis of ableisms and racisms and all other forms of discriminations, cis heterosexisms, obviously. By populists, I mean politicians who explicitly pit the people, whom they claim not only to represent but also to be uniquely capable of doing, against an economic, political, or cultural elite that they typically demonize, an elite that often includes key institutions that hold a lawful and tolerant society together, whether Congress, the judiciary, or a free press. Think about that's what's so sinister, especially within a neoliberal, transnational, and global media industry, with what the right, like the far right, is doing with demonizing the media ownership and then connecting it to anti-Semitism. Because as we talked about the other day, there is a problem with the media. It's the fact that it's monopolized by an oligarchy that is the transnational capitalist class. But they're not talking about that as the problem. They're saying that it's like some sort of QAnon shit. And that's deeply terrible and problematic. Like, that is an absolutely perverse issue with the actual corrupt system that is the media issue. In the case of right-wing populists in particular, their rhetoric typically emphasizes cultural differences and the importance of national identity, often portraying their nation as one under threat of invasion by immigrants or those of different ethnicities or religions, hence all the xenophobia. In doing so, they pose a very serious threat to a cohesive society in which there is respect for the institutions and norms that help bind us into a culture of tolerance, understanding, and fairness. They seek to divide society rather than unite it, and are willing to stoke racial, religious, and ethnic tensions if it suits their purposes. Lonely people, anxious and untrusting, desperate for belonging, yet constantly seeing snakes, are their ideal and most vulnerable audience. Yeah, ringing "You will not replace us" bells. Or like the other bill, like that's right next to it, like, if I can't have you, no one can. Ever since I saw that Twilight Zone episode when I was a kid, I was like, yeah. How's it going, Belle? Welcome. We're reading The Lonely Century by Noreena Hertz, so I'm glad that you're here. We are on chapter 3. The next section is called Loneliness and the Politics of Intolerance. It was Hannah Arendt who first wrote about the link between loneliness and the politics of intolerance. One of the titans of the 20th century intellectual thought, Arendt grew up in the German city of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad in Russia, and the city of one of her greatest philosophical influences, Immanuel Kant. Love the Twilight Zone. Yeah, it's good. I know I still haven't watched the new season. I feel like folks told me to, but I didn't have whatever thing it was on. While Kant's life is one of extreme rootedness, he never left his native city, and a popular story goes that Königsberg townsmen would set their clocks by his unfailingly regular walks. Arendt's life was one of exile and dispossession. Her parents were assimilated Jews. The word Jew was never mentioned at home, she later recalled, but the growing tide of anti Semitic persecution in Germany rapidly made her conscious of her religious identity. The turning point was 1933, the year of Reichstag fire and Hitler's seizure of power. Arendt was living in Berlin, offering her apartment as a safe house for Hitler's opponents and conducting illegal research for the Zionist Federation for Germany on the extent of official anti-Semitism. The Gestapo became aware of her activities and imprisoned Arendt and her mother for 8 days. After being released to await trial, despite having no legal travel documents, the two of them fled Germany, first to Prague via the forests of the Erzgebirge Mountains, and a sympathetic German family whose house was crisscrossed by the border, then to Geneva via a socialist family friend who worked for the League of Nations. Arendt, now stateless, next made her way to Paris, where she stayed for 7 years as an undocumented refugee. When the Nazis invaded France in 1940, Arendt was separated from her husband, Heinrich Blöcher, an activist who had also fled Hitler's Germany, and taken to the notorious internment camp of Gurs in the south of France. In the chaos of France's defeat, she escaped and reunited with her husband in the small town of Montauban. The couple then managed to obtain an emergency visa to the United States, crossed the Spanish border over the Pyrenees, took a train to Lisbon, and after 3 months finally set sail for New York in April 1941. Also, shout out to Portugal. It was a lucky escape. In the summer of 1941, the State Department ended its emergency visa program, closing off another exit route for Jews fleeing the Nazis. In the 8 years that Arendt had lived the life of a fugitive, a life of rootlessness and narrow escapes for no other reason than she was Jewish, Germans had fallen under the spell of Nazi totalitarianism. After the war, documentary evidence presented at the Nuremberg trials laid bare the horror of the Nazi machinery of extermination. How could this have happened? Arendt wondered. What drives an ordinary person to participate in, or at least tolerate, an industrialized plan to commit? I haven't seen a word that replaces this, but the G word. I guess we can say this on TikTok, never mind. Genocidal murder. I forget, people talking about genocide all the time on TikTok now. I'm trying to make sure I don't get banned. Arendt sought to find out the main elements of Nazism, to trace them back, and to discover the underlying real political problems. In 1951, she published an iconic and controversial book on the subject, The Origins of Totalitarianism. It's a wide-ranging volume encompassing the rise of anti-Semitism, the role of propaganda, imperialism's fusion of racism and bureaucracy. But at the end of the book, she turns to what appears to be a surprising factor: loneliness. For Arendt, totalitarianism bases itself on loneliness, which is among the most radical and desperate experiences of man. Finding its adherents in those whose chief characteristic is not brutality and backwardness, but his isolation and lack of normal social relationships. She argues that for those who feel they have no place in society, it is through surrendering their individual selves to ideology that the lonely rediscover their purpose and self-respect. Loneliness, or the experience of not belonging to the world at all, is, she writes, the essence of totalitarian government, preparation of its executioners and victims. Oh, have fun at the pool. But yeah, this is why I connect. I mean, everything about incels suddenly makes sense, right? And the black pills and doomers and stuff like that. The loneliness Arendt spoke of echoes key aspects of my definition. Feelings of marginalization and powerlessness, of being isolated, excluded, and bereft of status and support. And these dimensions of loneliness are a clear and growing danger here, and now in the 21st century. Loneliness and the new age of populists. To be clear, our world today is not that of 1930s Germany. Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad you're good. Bye. Bye. I don't know. I mean, this book was published in 2021, by the way. So a lot has changed, I would say. Despite the rise of populism globally over the past few years, and a number of authoritarian leaders, including Hungary's Viktor Orban, Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, China's Xi Jinping, and Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, using the cloak of COVID-19 to further cement their hold on power and suppress their citizens' freedoms, we are not experiencing a widespread this is the sentence I disagree with. We are not experiencing a widespread emergence of totalitarian rule. Again, in 2021 we weren't, but we absolutely are now. A lot has changed in the last 2 years. Yeah, exactly, Kat. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's quite clear that we are. Oh, Nick, you were talking to Twinkle. So, if anyone was curious, I have Twinkle is the little pet. I mean, you can see it on TikTok too, I suppose. The little Twinkle right there. Whenever I get follows and stuff, she gets XP. So, once I get affiliate, you'll be able to give her matcha lattes and treats. But for right now, you can just chat with her. So, I'm glad. Thank you for saying hi to Twinkle, Nick. There are, however, warnings from history that we should not ignore. The impact of COVID-19 has led many to compare today to the Great Depressions of the 1930s, with unemployment and poverty surging. See, I'll give the author the uncertainty of being so immersed in the early years of it that she couldn't possibly have foreseen what we're now experiencing, of course. Which goes to show, right? Like when something's written and published in a book, especially, it's often going to lag behind, in especially moments of an enormous crisis like what we're experiencing right now, in a way that goes to show how much can really change in a really short period of time. And loneliness and diminished economic circumstances are often interlinked. Researchers have established both that the unemployed are significantly lonelier than those who have work, and also that poverty increases the risk of social isolation. Social isolation. Moreover, loneliness had already become an everyday experience of the ever growing masses, as Arendt wrote of pre war Germany even before the coronavirus struck. It is a phenomena that over recent years has been actively exploited for political gain by right wing populist leaders and extremist forces at the Democratic margins. Loneliness is not, of course, populism's only driver. The rise of contemporary populism has cultural, societal, and technological antecedents, as well as economic causes. These include the rapid spread of misinformation and divisiveness on social media, the clash between liberal and conservative, progressive and traditional values, and demographic changes. Moreover, different countries' experiences of populism may have different combinations of causes. Nor would it be right to say that everyone who feels lonely or marginalized votes for populists of either the right or left, in the same way that not everyone who is lonely gets ill. Even among those who feel socially, politically, or economically marginalized, there are clearly large numbers who continue to hope that mainstream parties will respond to their needs, while others choose to ignore the ballot box entirely. But a major and often overlooked driver for why so many people have voted for populist leaders in recent years, and right wing populists in particular, is loneliness. As we will see, a growing body of data reveals the significant role that feelings of isolation and alienation have played in transforming our political landscape, with disturbing echoes of Arendt's findings. I fucking love this. This is exactly like what everyone needs to hear. So thank you all for being here. I'm gonna get a drink of water. So for those who haven't really seen me before, welcome. My dissertation was about sexual ecologies in the algorithmic age. Specifically, happened to take off. I like wrote it 2 years before COVID start. Like I started writing it at least, and then COVID happened, and now it has enormous implications for the overall environment. Here's what I call the COVID era, the environment influenced by the virus, and what I'm thinking of because I'm turning my dissertation into a book, and I'm writing it this summer, which is why having this book to read to you and you being here to enjoy it is both beneficial to me because it gets me to read, But I think hopefully it will bring you insights, and knowledge can be power. So hopefully this will benefit you for that. But in my book, I'm definitely going to talk much more at length than I've seen this author already speak to about the way that, especially with ongoing COVID denial and the government ending the emergency order, the way that that's affecting the millions of people that were left without health insurance, and the ongoing isolation that we're being driven to because of a complete acceptance of us being expendable, especially with a disease that the more we get it, we see that it's in a recent study that came out earlier last month, like the 22nd, I believe. They're connecting COVID to cancer growth and the amount of damage that just goes on because it attacks our T cells, which then, of course, affects every ability for us to combat disease moving forward. So this book couldn't be any more relevant for numerous reasons, because not only is it already horrific to know that COVID does that, but thinking of the isolation that especially disabled folks, especially anyone multiply disenfranchised, is going to be experienced because all things compound. This book couldn't be any more important to be reading. Of course. I know, I'm excited to write it. So this book has just given me more fuel to combine the academic and artistic and activist work that I'm trying to put together. So that is to say, thanks for being here. I didn't realize how long was I muted there. Anyway, the list goes on. The mono, everything else, like it's all connected. All right. Can you hear me now? I know, I realized the it muted before. Okay, yeah. It was because whenever this mic isn't lighting up, it means that it's muted. So I don't know if I accidentally touched it with my face or what. But basically I was saying that whether it was bird flu, whether it's the fungal infections that are taking off, or just the doctor that recently I stitched with sadness, the one where she was like, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but everyone's getting mono." And I was like, you don't, a whole doctor? You don't know what's going on? Like, it's obviously because of COVID immune system damage. Like, that's why people are, yeah, I mean, just, and who know, and this is such a short period of time after, you know what I mean? We know that so many viruses end up causing different types of cancers as well. Like, we're playing with fire by pretending that this is fine to just let run rampant. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. All right. Loneliness and the politics of distrust. As early as 1992, researchers began to pick up on a correlation between social isolation and votes for the far right Front National's Jean Marie Le Pen in France. I know, thank you. In the Netherlands, researchers crunching data gathered from over 5,000 participants in 2008 found that the less people trusted that those around them would look after their interests and not deliberately do them harm, the more likely they were to vote for PVV, the Netherlands' nationalist right-wing populist party. Across the Atlantic, a 2016 poll by the Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy asked 3,000 Americans whom they would turn to first if they needed help with challenges ranging from childcare to financial assistance to advice on relationships to getting a ride. The results were revealing. Donald Trump voters were significantly more likely than supporters of either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders to have replied not only with reference to neighbors, community organizations, or friends, but simply with, I just rely on myself. They were also more likely to report having fewer close friends and fewer acquaintances and spending fewer hours a week with both. Other researchers at the Public Religion Research Institute investigating the traits of Republican supporters in the final stages of Republican primaries in 2016 found that supporters of Donald Trump were twice as likely as those of his main opponent, Ted Cruz, to have seldom or never participated in community activities like sports teams, book clubs, or parent-teacher organizations. The corollary also holds true. A major study that looked at 6,000 individuals in 17 European countries over the course of 15 years found that people who were members of civic associations, things like volunteer groups and neighborhood associations, were significantly less likely to vote for their country's right-wing populist party than people who were not. The researchers drew similar conclusions for Latin America. It seems that the more enmeshed we are in our wider community, the more we feel we have people around us we can rely on, the less likely we are to heed the siren call of right-wing populists. And while correlation does not necessarily mean causation, there is a logic for why this would be so. For it is through joining local associations, volunteering, taking on community leadership roles, or simply taking part in community activities or maintaining our friendships that we're able to practice inclusive democracy, to learn not only how to come together, but also how to manage and reconcile our differences. Conversely, the fewer social ties we have, the more isolated we feel, and the less practice we have at managing difference and behaving civilly and cooperatively with each other. The less likely we are likely to trust our fellow citizens, and the more appealing we may find the exclusionary and divisive form of community that populists peddle. I feel like I'm experiencing like a mental montage of like, so I used to be on that all audio app Clubhouse. I don't know if you all were ever on it, but there's a lot of these populist peddlers on there. And it was weird to see it because I grew up in Northwest Indiana. So, y'all, I don't know how familiar you are with Indiana, but like I grew up around a lot of conservatives, a lot of white people, a lot of people that thought that they were anti-union, and just all the typical dominant discriminations. And it's weird thinking about like how many people I've heard. But what I always remember, because I would have conversations with them sitting at like hole in the wall bars mostly, is that they were always like clearly in so much pain in a way that they wouldn't articulate. Like they're the regulars at the bars. They're the ones that are like sitting there. And I mean, my ass was sitting there drinking whiskey as much as them, right? Like, so I say that as one that has experienced my own form of that. But a lot of just like repressed emotion, a lot of feeling like they have to fend for themselves. It's interesting how that does always go together. And I think this book is filling in the blanks for that for me as someone that's had a lot of conversations with folks that do fit that narrative. The loneliness of marginalization. Being lonely is not simply about feeling socially isolated or lacking communal ties, however. It also encompasses not being heard and understood. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung had this insight. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding views which others find inadmissible. Oh, don't worry. Yeah, thanks for being here, Bennett. I'm just doing, I'm just trying to do the best I can. So I appreciate your support. As we have seen in recent times, it is economic pain and the consequent feelings of marginalization and isolation that many supporters of populists have been especially desperate to be heard on by those in political power. Thank you. Happy fourth day of Gay Pride. And I felt very strongly that they were not. Testimonies of U.S. railroad workers prior to the 2016 presidential election show how Donald Trump redrew the political map by actively playing to this, making many of those who felt economically abandoned and unheard, especially people who historically had not felt that way, feel like they were being listened to. This is what we see. I mean, and everyone has, I think, spoken to that. Like, I've heard it in so many different words. It is a sentiment that endured among vast numbers of this in his constituency in the 2020 presidential election. Yeah, don't worry. Like I said, I'm just happy. Thanks for being here. Like I said, never any pressure to talk. We love the hangout, the silent listeners as much as folks that are talking. So thanks for being here. Rusty is a 40-something locomotive engineer from Etowah in eastern Tennessee's McMinn County. His grandfather and father both worked for the railroad and voted Democrat their entire lives. He did too until 2016, that is. Growing up, I was just kind of taught that if you were going to be a union man and you're going to be a blue-collar worker and get down there and get your hands dirty, you need to be a Democrat, he said. But to be honest, the harder I work, the less I see, you know? I don't see myself getting any better off. For Rusty and his fellow engineers, whose labor is essential for transporting billions of tons of coal each year, Obama-era regulations resulted in more than penny pinching. They were a kind of betrayal. I just feel like he's come in with his Clean Coal Act and some of his policies that he's hurt me, Rusty said. His voice caught. Obama hurt me personally, caused major hardship. In contrast, Donald Trump was the only candidate that was telling it like it is, and the only one who cared about how Rusty was feeling and wanted to hear about his problems. This is why the critique of neoliberalism and corporate Democrats is so crucial, because if we don't actually fully understand why people could possibly consider Trump as an option. Like, they really won't get it. Fellow railroader and erstwhile Democrat Gary, a resident of southern Charleston, West Virginia, put similar faith in the permatanned presidential candidate. When Trump said he was going to bring out our jobs back to the United States and he was going to renegotiate trade deals, that's when I thought, wow, I'm going to vote for Trump, Gary continued. Trump's the only one for the poor and the middle class people. He's the only one who seems to be interested in helping the working people. He's our only hope. Nick said, speaking of the rail workers more recently, after what happened in Ohio and Biden siding with the companies over sick care and time off, who can these people trust? No, that's so legit. Yeah, it was ridiculous. I mean, and remember, right? Like around the time, and I'm in Ohio, like I'm like an hour from there. Like, so like what I was thinking as soon as it happened is like, okay, not only is Biden not doing shit, but literally Trump went there from what I remember. Like he went to East Palestine and he literally was there. I was like, dude, it's so clear that they're not even trying. Like it doesn't get any clearer than the last few years that the neoliberals aren't even gonna try to pretend like they actually care. Like they will around election time, but they're not going to actually do shit that we all deserve, which is like, yeah, it's just wild. I mean, and just to make everyone clear, just in case maybe you're not picking up what I'm putting down, but I think most of us, it seems like folks that are interacting is. Obviously, I don't, I'm not a fan of Trump. Fuck Trump. Like, Trump's a fucking billionaire who literally has, his family is associated with the Yahtzee party. Like, by no means is he the answer. But, like, this is why people are being swayed, and it's important that we know that. Where were we? Oh, okay, here we go. Oh, yeah, okay. Terry, another erstwhile Democratic voter, concurred. This father of 8 from East Tennessee with 20 years railroad service, who found himself living paycheck to paycheck instead of the pretty good life he had lived before, used similar language to both Gary and Rusty. Trump will take care of his people, he said, while previous political leaders had, in his mind, ignored their needs when it came to protecting their employment and ensuring they retained a decent standard of living. Yeah. Yeah, Kat said Republicans offer answers even if they're the wrong ones. Yeah, that's a fact. Where once the Democratic Party, or at the very least the trade union, might have provided hope, many of those feeling marginalized both in 2016 and in the 2020 vested all of their faith in Trump, particularly white working class voters. So I worked for the Democratic Party in 2016 as a campaign manager for a state representative in Northwest Indiana. And I spoke with union representatives like on the daily, basically. And it was interesting because it was around the time I'd just learned about neoliberalism. I was like in my master's learning about it at that exact moment. And I knew better than to do the job. But it gave me firsthand experience to see and talk to people all around the area about the way that they are experiencing exactly this. In that year, this was before the election. So it was like in the summer before the election of 2016. And I talked to so many people that said exactly this stuff. They didn't understand the way that, of course, the wealth distribution has been shifted immensely in our, to our detriments. The way that people like Trump are doing everything they possibly can to not tax themselves or to not redistribute the wealth that their family obviously benefits from as being part of the oligarchy. Like the kind of shit, I mean, the amount of the lack of advocacy really stuck out to me in talking to union workers or people that were anti-union, because I would go door to door, right? I would canvass, I would phone bank. The amount of citizens I'd talk to that would say, well, I would be pro-union, but the union leaders, like when I was a part of one, the union leaders aren't advocating for us like they used to anymore. And think about it, right? Like if there is a party, obviously, that's associated, just like the book is saying, with unions, it's the Democratic Party. But because they've grown increasingly corporatized, the leaders that are meant to advocate for the unions aren't doing what they're supposed to anymore. So it's like there were countless people that I spoke to that shifted from Democrat to Republican in that year for that reason, because they were like, well, it's more beneficial to me to be an independent contractor, because otherwise they would constantly talk about like, well, the unions are tying our hands, and like they would refer to people in unions as like lazy because they said like, oh, well, they gotta talk to their union representative and then before they could do anything, like as if that's like more of a burden than a help. It was just, and same, I mean, this was mostly steel workers that I would say said this rhetoric, but similar kind of stuff with teachers unions. K through 12, people saying they can't do their jobs anymore. Like, none of that is a coincidence. But again, it looks like it's not that big a deal. In isolation, from moment to moment, but over time you see a trajectory that's grown increasingly impossible for people to like have faith in anyone that claims to be advocating for workers. So it all makes sense. Oh, for sure. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Lady Fox. It's just, I mean, we all see this stuff all the time, right? Like, I mean, that's why what I was saying the other day, I mean, like, what I want critical media ecology to really be is like a reminder to people that you don't need to have all the fancy pieces of paper to see what's going on. Like, we all live this shit every day. You see it firsthand because you exist in this landscape. You see it even if maybe you don't have the contextual awareness that others can share. That's why having conversations like this on all types of platforms is super important, because it connects it gives the why to the how. All right, here we go. So where do we leave off? I'm trying to think if we finish this page. We're gonna reread this sentence. So, oh, yeah, you don't need a weatherman to see which way the wind blows. Exactly. Yeah, that's such a good way to put that. Where once the Democratic Party, or at the very least the trade union, might have provided hope, many of those feeling marginalized both in 2016 and in the 2020 vested all their faith in Trump, particularly white working class voters. That was where we left off. This is especially so in places where the infrastructure of community was weak, social ties had been eroded, and citizens felt economically vulnerable. In places like Terry's and Rusty's home, East Tennessee, where the previous decade had seen coal mines closing and the wounds from the 2008 financial crisis still gaped, all contributed to the belief that the powerful people in Washington couldn't be bothered with the needs of everyday workers. Whether or not Trump's policies would actually improve the lives of his supporters almost seemed to matter less than the fact that he appeared to be listening when other politicians seemed deaf to their cries and the needs of their economically ravaged communities. It was an "I'm the only one who truly cares" strategy that Trump doubled down on during his re-election bid. Nancy Pelosi is only interested in bailing out badly run, crime-ridden Democratic cities and states. Where's the lie? That's all she's interested in. She's not interested in helping people, he claimed on the 2020 campaign trail. While Joe Biden actively sought to counter this narrative by campaigning on a message of restoring jobs, reminding working-class voters of his record as an ally of organized labor, and making much of his own working-class roots, for many Trump voters, this was not enough. It's lonely to feel economically insecure. But it's even lonelier to feel that no one cares about your struggles, particularly those in positions of power who you believe should be providing help and support. That was Trump's great accomplishment, convincing so many that he cared. It's not just in the United States that populists continue to prove convincing to many. Eric is a young Parisian baker who loves Scottish reel dancing, rap, and video games. When I conversed with him in 2019, I found him earnest, direct, and very polite. He talked openly about the pain and frustration of working hard and yet still living just above the minimum wage. Like many young people, Eric feels that society's cards are strongly stacked against him. The economic system is unfair, he explained. It's not enough to work hard, you have to work extra hard. If you're good, it's not enough. You have to be super good and know the right people, otherwise you won't earn enough to live. And he shared with me the extent to which he felt abandoned to a painful degree, telling me, his voice both sad and angry, of how he doesn't believe the state will be there for him if he's sick or when he's old, and how alone this makes him feel. Eric is a prominent member of the youth wing of Rassemblement National Rally, formerly known as the Front National. This right-wing populist party, with a long history of xenophobia, was rebranded in 2018 and remains one of France's most popular political parties. Under its previous incarnation, it was associated with attempts to undermine the horrors of the Holocaust, with its founder and then leader Jean-Marie Le Pen, referring to the Yahtzee gas chambers as a point of detail in the history of the Second World War. More recently, under Le Pen's daughter Marine, I actually don't know hopefully that's right, the party's anti-immigrant rhetoric has been directed toward France's Muslim community, which she portrays as the inherent host of radical Islam, an octopus with tentacles everywhere in the immigrant neighborhoods, the associations, the sports clubs. Marine Le Pen was prosecuted by human rights groups in 2015 for inciting hatred with her comments comparing Muslim prayers on the streets to the Yahtzee occupation. Though she was ultimately acquitted, her rhetoric has not strayed far. Whereas it might once have been in France's left-wing socialist party that Eric would have found his political home, today it's in this radical right-wing nationalist and populist party that he has found a place to belong. For like the Earth's Democratic Railroad workers who turned to Trump in 2016, Eric believes it is only Rassemblement National that protects the little people, of which he is proud to be one, people whom other parties have abandoned. The failure of the left is, of course, that in the eyes of many, it stopped being seen as the political grouping that had the interests of the forgotten and abandoned at heart. Yeah, thanks for being here. Saroon Sanda. I feel like I'm probably breaking up those words incorrectly, but you get it. Such feelings of abandonment are echoed in more wide-reaching studies across Europe. Researchers analyzed 500 interviews with people in right-wing strongholds in France and Germany, places such as Gelsenkirchen-Ost, a down-at-heel suburb northeast of Essen, blighted with high levels of unemployment, and where anti-immigrant party Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, garnered nearly a third of the vote in 2017 elections, 3 times the vote it got nationally, or the Les Camps neighborhood of Lune Plague in northern France, where 42.5% of voters in the 2017 French presidential election chose Marine Le Pen. What they found was that pervasive feelings of abandonment were a dominant and recurring theme among the interviewees. Across the globe, those who feel socially and economically marginalized, who feel that the traditional political parties that once championed them have now cast them aside and are not listening to their concerns or providing answers to their grievances, have been turning out in disproportionately high numbers in the first decades of the 20th century for parties at the political extremes. It makes sense why this would be so. If you feel marginalized, ignored, and invisible, and someone appears who promises to see and hear you, it's understandably going to have a lure. Whether it's Trump's rallying cry that the forgotten men and women of the USA are forgotten no more, or Marine Le Pen's oath to serve a forgotten France, a France abandoned by the self-appointed elite, such carefully chosen messaging may well be enticing. And the reality was that many had been forgotten for decades as neoliberal capitalism and deindustrialization was then followed by the 2008 financial crisis and a subsequent recession coupled with policies of austerity. These collectively took an asymmetric economic toll, with lower skilled men among those who felt they were suffering most, the target market for right-wing populists. Nick says, fascism seems to be an inherent trait in capitalism. It keeps losing in the marketplace of ideas, yet here it is over and over. Yeah, it's because, actually, hold on, let me hold that thought. I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick, and then I think I want to read another one, because I'm really enjoying this, and I feel like we're all kind of, like, in a good role. But I have a human body, so BRB. Let me put this right here. All right. All right, I chugged a protein shake. Let me click there. Okay, we are back. I was just pausing so because I got a human body, I gotta do human body stuff. So, as Nick asked, so Nick said, fascism seems to be an inherent trait in capitalism. It keeps losing in the marketplace of ideas, yet here it is over and over. So, I heard this is where the lonely people are hanging out. You found the right place. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, of course, fascism can exist in other forms of economic and philosophical models, but I think that if we're going to talk about an economic model that situates having a totalitarian regime that benefits those that are that, I would argue that capitalism is more inherently requiring. I mean, it's more suited. Like, if we're going to continue, like, if we're going to call an economic model a climate, I would argue that basically capitalism is kind of like a desert for cactuses. That is the parasitic class. Like, they're just well suited together. Um, it's something they can survive in a horrific environment because they build an underclass that quite literally dehydrates everything to death by sucking up all the water. Like, that's basically, I mean, in that way, what's better to fuel people hoarding wealth than the model that deliberately requires that? Like, like, because I mean, it's no coincidence. Like, even I was considering rereading the book Capitalism and Disability by Marta Russell because that book's fucking awesome. I read it on the All Eddie Up Clubhouse, so if anyone wants to check out my profile in there, I'm never on there anymore, but I have my Critical Media Ecology Club that's over there. So I have like a bunch of books that I've read, and I read that one in its entirety. And she does an incredible job talking about the way that especially disabled folks are the underclass, like always. Like, I mean, it's not a coincidence that recently we see that research study that says autists have at best a 75% unemployment rate. It goes up to 85% if you have a college degree. Like, like that's, it doesn't get any clearer. I mean, and Marta Russell, I believe, I think she had muscular dystrophy if I'm remembering correctly. No, maybe something else. But she was disabled and her work is just absolutely phenomenal. So definitely, if you haven't already, get Capitalism and Disability because it does, I mean, and such an under discussed community to talk about like the ways that, especially in the COVID era, disabled folks are always deemed expendable. Like that's, it's been a long time coming, of course. Thanks. I'm glad that you liked that. It does sound like a good band name, as usual. I think that's that's just a marker of good creativity. A desert for cactuses. Got too much of both. Get capitalism and disability. Got too much of both. That's hilarious. Did I miss anything else? Let me see. But yes, Candy, this is where the lonely people are hanging out. You found the right place, so welcome. Yay! It's so nice to see so many wonderful people. Thanks all for hanging out. Candy said, I 100% didn't start deconstructing my ableism until COVID. Yeah. I think that's something that realistically, I mean, and it's to be expected, right? It's, again, it's this kind of stuff is, it has little to do with us individually and everything to do with the way that the world was built long before we got here and the way that this world was built with eugenics. Like it's built into the bricks of the institutions. So it's everything that we are, it's everything that we've learned to be. And we can't help what the world was like before we got here. That's literally impossible. Like we couldn't possibly have done anything. We couldn't, I mean, arguably, most of us we're too young. I mean, when you're born into a place that's poisoned, you're going to suffer the consequences of poisoning. Like, and that's ultimately what this philosophy is. Also, thank you for that follow, Jade. Jade Brain Glitch. I like that. You always have the best usernames, like I swear. All right. But yeah, it has everything to do with like learning. I mean, because unfortunately, if a deeply oppressive society survives by ensuring that the people that it teaches to oppress don't see that they're doing it while they're doing it. Like that's one of the main ways of reinforcing an inherently inequitable society. It's the reason why I recently published, and I shared that abstract for my paper that's coming out later this month, Kara's Extension of Whiteness. Not everyone's skin has been extended equal. And it's about, I call it color paved racisms. Like I mean this in the sense that racism is quite literally built into the infrastructure. Like, obviously, folks have talked for a very long time about redlining and gentrification and the white flight, but truly, like, it's gotten worse over COVID, especially with the gig economy, especially with just like all the compounded disenfranchisements that are affecting the way that we exist in space and time. So it's all together. It's never a coincidence. It's all discriminations built into the bricks of the United States context as features. But as this book is talking about, it's influencing the entire transnational and global structure. Because it's globalization, it all it does is takes neoliberal structures and glocalizes it. So it basically takes the culture of that area and then makes it as neoliberal as possible. It supplants like a localized form of globalization that is causing the loneliness. That's why when we talk about the philosophic and economic model, it seems like it wouldn't influence, like at least people are easily oftentimes responding to me in a way it's like, why would that affect how I see myself and why we relate to others? Well, it's because everything is connected and we only know what we know. Like, that's why that's one of my favorite things to say to describe critical media ecology. I know, yeah. Well, it makes sense, right? Like, so I just saw this great TikTok, and I'll say this, but then we'll continue reading, I promise. But I saw this great TikTok the other night, um, and it said, you know, when you're in like a classroom when you just watched a movie and the lights are off, and your teacher flips on the light, and as soon as the light flips on, like if the light is so bright, you kind of like are like, oh fuck, like it's too bright. Like I need to close my eyes and I need my eyes to adjust to the light. The TikToker said that's kind of like how truth works. Because if you're faced with the truth, it's gonna feel blinding at first. It's gonna feel face threatening. It's gonna feel affrontive. Your odds are gonna be defensive. And I think that's basically what we're experiencing. It's kind of like growing pains for a deeply inequitable society. And I think that inherently that's just required. Because again, we aren't responsible for how horrific things have always been. But we are responsible if we know like what we can do to share that information and to help people adjust as painlessly as possible while recognizing that they need to do their own part because we fully have the ability to make whatever world we want, especially now. We've never had the ability to change things faster, ever. We've never been this connected. Candy said, speaking of capitalism, I'm off to work. I know, I'm glad that you were too. Thanks for being here. Yay. All right. Oh, my Kindle went to sleep. Wake up, Kindle. It's time to read more. All right, so for anyone just popping in, welcome. We're reading The Lonely Century by Narina Hertz. I started a Twitch a little less than a week ago, and we've already gotten an incredible amount of support, so thank you. I love you. I love doing this. I'm having the best time, so I hope you are too. We are in chapter 3. The next part of the chapter is called Loneliness and the Loss of Status and Esteem. Many populist leaders understand something else too, that loneliness is not just about feeling forgotten or socially isolated or feeling bereft of voice. It's also a feeling of loss. Loss of community for sure, loss of economic security as well, but also crucially, loss of social standing. Remember Arendt's definition of the lonely as those who have no place in society? And social standing is inexorably linked, especially for men, with the fellowship, pride, and status that come with not only having a job, but a decent job, with history, solidarity, and purpose. My face is so itchy. Indeed, in Trumpian rhetoric, to make America great again is to restore an old world order in which traditional industries are at the heart of neighborhoods, providing employment that creates both the powerful sense of self-worth and a strong sense of community spirit. Remember his oft-repeated pledge to get our great coal miners back to work? In a world in which I produce, therefore I am, in which it feels shameful not to be employed or to have a low-status job, the promise of a revitalized community and renewed social standing is particularly welcomed.
As such, it is not surprising that Trump's promises appealed so much to railroad workers like Terry, who lamented the way that we used to be proud of working on the railroad, proud of what we did, and now nobody is. Or to Gary, who chronicled a litany of factories in his area that had been shut down in recent years. Factories that made things, whether the Libby Owens Ford glass factory, Union Carbide, True Temper, or the former Naval Ordnance plant near his hometown of southern Charleston. Gary went on to explain that although there are other jobs one can get, a job at a fast food chain or a grocery store or in a Walmart, it's all low pay jobs. Whether such jobs inevitably pay less than the old factory jobs is debatable. But it's not just that these new jobs are low paid. The bigger issue is that they are jobs that are deemed to be of diminished social status and standing, jobs that one may not feel as proud to find oneself doing. Even before the coronavirus pandemic sent unemployment soaring, such low status jobs were the only ones available for increasing numbers of people, especially in former manufacturing hubs and deindustrialized regions. Oh, thanks. The low unemployment figures obscured the discontent and disaffection that lurked beneath the statistics. Indeed, it is a sense of diminished status, even more perhaps than low earnings per se, that sociologists Noam Gidron and Peter A. Hall believe underlies why so many white working class men, in particular men like Gary, Rusty, Terry, and Eric, have turned to right wing populists over the past years, not only in the United States. I think it's the little hairs on my face. It's like tickling. I have the most sensitive skin, and like my hairs are just like a menace. In a 2017 paper in which they analyzed the relationship between feelings of a loss of social standing and voting preferences in 12 developed democracies between 1987 and 2013, they found that white men without a college degree who felt they lacked social status, either because of the poor quality of work available to them, or because they didn't have a job, or because they felt their standing had been diminished by the rise in status of college graduates, people of color, and women, were significantly more likely to vote for right-wing populist parties than those who did not. For these parties promised them respect and a restoration of status. As Donald Trump laid out on the campaign trail in 2016, while my opponent slanders you as deplorable and irredeemable, I call you hardworking American patriots who love your country and want a better future for all our people. You are soldiers and sailors, carpenters and welders. You are Americans and you are entitled to leadership that honors you, cherishes you, and defends you. Every American is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect in our country. This is where the lonely people meet, Skull Dave. Skull Love Dave. Returning to this theme in 2020, Trump chose again to energize his base by appealing to their desire for status and self-worth. Proud citizens like you helped build this county. Or country, sorry, not county. The president tweeted in October 2020, continuing, and together we are taking back our country. We are returning the power to you, the American people. Also, thank you. Where did I leave off? Thank you so much again for all the gifts, David. I know that was smart with all the exclamation points, by the way. Thank you for doing that, Nick. I'll just restart this section. So the peddling of community. There's something else populists proffer to belonging. For a cadre that had lost not only status, but also the community that their work and their trade unions had hitherto provided, and who were disproportionately isolated and lacking in social ties, this was also extremely important. The loss of brotherhood, now that he and his fellow engineers were pitted against each other for ever fewer jobs, was something Rusty, among others, especially mourned. It is in this void of community and mutuality that populists like Trump so successfully and purposefully stepped with their very own clear and vibrant take on belonging. Think about Trump's rallies, which were a staple of his offering throughout his political career, not only before he won the presidency, but after. He held nearly 70 in the first 3 years of his term and continued to hold them even during the height of the pandemic. While of course other American politicians hold rallies too, Trump's were qualitatively different. They drew people not only as political displays, but as massive community rituals at which people felt part of a fellowship. They were family affairs, with 3 generations regularly turning out, mothers and sons, grannies and grandpas in tow. Unlike at his political rivals' rallies, where people typically showed up in their everyday clothes, at Trump rallies you saw a sea of red-clad folks sporting matching Make America Great Again hats, pins, and t-shirts. Repetitive playlists, proud to be an American, sometimes on a loop, meant that people could sing along to familiar music as it filled the background with patriotic mantras. The same chants and applause lines meant that each audience member felt in sync with thousands of others. While Hillary Clinton's election rallies were serious, and some might say somewhat dull affairs, and Biden's were both restrained and constrained given his commitment to following COVID safety and prevention protocols, Trump's remained more akin to the theatrics and fandom of a World Wrestling Entertainment event, even as COVID raged. WWE. When there were the linguistic choices, the rhetoric Trump used to reinforce this sense of togetherness, of unity. Trump predominantly spoke in the first person plural, repeatedly using we and us to forge a relational bond, though of course he has next to nothing in common with many of his supporters. This makes the people feel like they're included in what's really happening, said one rally attendee, simultaneously connected to each other and to Trump. At the same time, he repeatedly invoked the people, the beautiful people, amazing people, great people. In fact, people was the most common word used in his speeches. These techniques, the branded gear, the chants, the we statements, and endless appeals to the collective, characterized a political showmanship and savviness that arguably traces its roots back to the American megachurches and even further to the Second Great Awakening of the 19th century. As such, Trump's rallies were far more than stump speeches and handshaking. They were what author Johnny Dwyer has called a kind of communion. Trump himself has remarked on their heated, quasi-religious atmosphere. At the opening of his first rally on August 21st, 2015, he beamed out at the crowd and invoked America's most famous evangelist. So beautiful, he said. Now I know how the great Billy Graham felt. Billy Graham felt? I don't know who that is, actually. I'm notoriously ignorant when it comes to, that kind of speaker. Trump was able to make people feel that they mattered in a way that felt almost unique in American politics. He satisfied a hunger to belong, to feel part of something for many of those for whom the traditional bonds of the workplace and the wider community had broken down, speaking directly to our basic evolutionary need to be part of something greater than ourselves. Oh, okay. Lady Fox said he went after the working class on the right. That's why they loved him. Thank you. In Europe, the dynamic had been very similar, with rallies cum social gatherings used effectively to draw people toward populist parties and their leaders. In Belgium, at festivals sponsored by right-wing populist party Vlaams Belang, Flemish interest, a nationalist party with anti-immigration, a key tenet, supporters split their time between anti-immigration speeches inside and an outside festival that included face painting, bouncy castles, and a stand for the book The Kidnapping of Europe. Across the border in Germany, AfD rallies have much in common with Donald Trump's. Families come holding balloons, sharing drinks on picnic tables, and clasping homemade signs with messages like Bjorn Hawk, Kanzler de Herzen, Chancellor of the Heart. In Spain, meanwhile, the right-wing populist party Vox draws people together at youth-targeted beer nights that it holds at nightclubs and bars at which no one over the age of 25 is allowed entry. And again, the language deployed is that of the community, the intention to create a sense of belonging that supporters have been unable to find elsewhere in the 21st century. The League is a big family, repeated Italy's right populist League politicians time and time again at their rallies. Originally a regionalist party claiming to represent the north of the country, the League, formerly Lega Nord, has become powerful on the national stage, having swung to the right in the past decade. Nick says Billy Graham was a televangelist that was responsible for a massive recruitment to the Baptist Church. He was on TV for 60 years, like late 1940s to the mid 2000s. Oh, okay. So that's what I was thinking, and I wanted to expand on actually. So that was like a perfect transition. So I'm thinking about the way that there's so many parallels between like a team sport and just like, I mean, how they spoke to earlier, like this author, Hertz, about the way that the community in the United States has been so wrapped up colonialism with like Abrahamic religions and like the communities that the churches brought, because of course people assimilating into whiteness were also assimilating into like the secularization of that nationalism, but also like the claim of like a Christian nation. The way that like sports always plays into nationalism, and like if you rob a community of connection, it's so much more vulnerable to fall into whatever form of televangelism or any other type of consumer culture or whatever else that's like, yeah, you're one of us, one of us, one of us. like it's all just, yeah, according to that plan. The blueprint is clear. And again, the language deployed is that of community. The intention to create a sense of belonging that supporters that have been unable to find elsewhere in the 21st century. I already read that. Rather than championing Northern secession, it now campaigns against immigration, the EU, and the LGBTQ plus rights, and has built a very significant political base. In the 2019 European Union elections, the League commanded over a third of Italy's votes. Like Trump, the party's leader, Matteo Salvini, wields language like a sword, often invoking intimate words like mama, papa, and friends to endear his supporters and reinforce his proffering of community. It is not just at these large gatherings that populist parties offer belonging. League supporter Giorgio, a dapper small businessman from Milan with a penchant for paddle tennis, who proudly shared with me his selfie with Salvini, described in 2019 the way the party has made him feel less alone. Thanks to the League, a year and a half ago, I started going to dinners and parties. They're called committees. They're like get-togethers for people in the party. And they're very nice, actually. You can meet a lot of people. We sing, and there's a really strong feeling of tradition, and everyone's singing in dialects from the north, and everyone's so happy with that because they feel like part of a community. Eric in Paris similarly talked of the joy he derives from his regular Wednesday political gatherings, of afterward going out for a drink together, of handing out posters and flyers together, of how hard it is to find people to have solidarity and community with, and how he has found it in Rassemblement National. And he lucidly admitted that had he not joined the party, he would have been profoundly lonely. It has given him the purpose and community he craves, a community that might once have been provided by a trade union, a traditional political party, the church, or even a vibrant community center or a neighborhood cafe. That's what I was thinking before. Like, because if we think about the way, and I talked about this just the other day, like when we were reading Sonntag's, I believe, the way that because the United States culture has been built on a myth of whiteness that's like completely made up, the way that that has robbed people of culture because of the assimilation into whiteness, and the way that that's been associated with citizenry, It makes complete sense that, especially since Americans are forced into a nuclear family that robs us of like the traditional larger group that existed before nuclear families became the norm. Like, we're all the more susceptible to going to gatherings that are like, oh, well, we're all this. Like, that's why people fall prey to things like the KKK. Because they're like, oh, wow, I can be a member of a community. And they're speaking to that exactly right. Oh, I didn't know that. Nick said, did you know that the NFL was paid by the DoD for the pre-game marketing campaign? I mean, with everything I've learned about how much money, like from the Yahtzees, has been funneled into corporations and stuff, like I'm never surprised by that kind of stuff anymore. Oh, well, thanks for stopping by. I'll see you soon. I'm gonna be on, we have like a just chatting tonight also at like 7 to 9. We'll probably end after this chapter just so I can have some dinner and then we'll come back. All right. A community that might once have been, yeah, okay, we already said that. It's too early to gauge whether support for populist politicians has been diminished by the months in which face to face gatherings of their supporters were restricted by rules on social distancing. Around 74 million people voted for Trump in 2020, after all, even more than in 2016. How they fare in the future will depend on a considerable extent on the position they held when the music stopped. Economic crises tend to be bad for governing parties, and there will be questions in every nation as to how competent these holding office were deemed to have been at saving not only jobs but also lives. Their popularity will be influenced too by the extent to which they are able to control the media narrative, and whether their followers buy into their version of the post crisis analysis. But during the lockdown, it was striking how quickly populists ramped up their online community offering as their ability to commune in person waned, as well as the president's personally taking center stage at the daily television press briefings with overt messages to his tribe, including repeated condemnation of the fake news, media, and denouncements of global institutions. Trump's campaign, already sitting on a massive social media following, upped its Facebook presence, and escalated its digital offerings, running massive volunteer trainings via Zoom and launching a digital only campaign with a a virtual rally that garnered nearly 1 million live streams. The League, Spain's Vox, and Belgium's Vlaams Belang, masters of social media too, also ramped up their offerings. The weaponization of immigration. Whether the community being proffered is online or in person, it shares, of course, a particular characteristic: the overt exclusion of others. For alongside right-wing populist parties' focus on belonging, with their beer nights and bouncy castles, has always been a clear message about who is not invited in. Think, for example, about the thousands of voices chanting hymn-like of Trump rallies. Build the wall. The subtext of the right-wing populist message of togetherness is one of racial, religious, and nationalist exclusion. Of us and them, we and they, this is where their greatest danger lies. In targeting those who feel lonely and abandoned, and creating community along nationalist or racial lines, populist leaders weaponize their tribalism against people who are different. These politicians have realized that for those who feel excluded, left behind, and lonely, for those who are unused to managing difference, and whose traditional sources of identity, whether class, employment, or church, are no longer as strong or secure as they once were, social identities such as nationality, ethnicity, language, and gender become, as professors Miko Salima and Christian von Scheve have written, more attractive as sources of meaning and self-esteem. I would add to those sources the allure of belonging. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for all the support, Dave. I really appreciate it. It is here that the manipulation of loneliness and isolation by populists takes on its ugliest and most divisive form. For remember how lonely people tend to see their neighbors, or their neighborhoods, as more hostile and threatening. Remember our lonely mouse and how aggressive he became when another mouse came to share his space. And remember how our brain's capacity to feel empathy may be inhibited by loneliness. by reinforcing their followers' sense of abandonment and marginalization, and setting this against an apparent political favoring of people unlike them, typically immigrants. Right-wing populist fear-mongering revs up the emotions, anxiety, and insecurity of their followers, and manipulates ethnic and religious difference to garner allegiance and support. They combine this with an appeal to the nostalgia of a bygone era, in which people were, according to this version of history, more connected, happier, and better off before those immigrants arrived and stole your benefits and jobs. Now, of course, right-wing populists add to this, before those foreigners infected you with a deadly virus. When the pandemic hit, it did not take long for a number of populist politicians to use the crisis to stoke racial, ethnic, and religious tensions, and to demonize those who are different. In the United States, Donald Trump's predilection for calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus encouraged a spat of attacks on Asian Americans. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán segued from holding culpable a group of Iranian students who were quarantined and later tested positive for Hungary's incidences of the virus to declaring all universities virus-prone, as there are lots of foreigners there. In Italy, Matteo Salvini was quick to link the spread of the disease to asylum seekers who had crossed the Mediterranean to Italy from North Africa. He provided no evidence for this claim. The use of disease as a weapon of racial divisiveness and nationalistic fervor, of course, has long-standing historical precedent. The Jews were blamed for the Black Death epidemic that swept through Europe in the 14th century, with thousands massacred as a consequence. Foreigners were attacked by mobs during Milan's plague of 1629 to 31, with Spaniards particularly vulnerable, and Irish immigrants were held responsible for outbreaks of cholera in American cities such as New York and Boston during the 1830s. Pandemics and xenophobia have been interlinked. Yet even before the coronavirus pandemic provided a new line of anti-other attack, leak supporter Giorgio in Italy had evidently absorbed these messages of antagonistic tribalism. The government has been putting its own citizens in second place after the immigrants that are coming from Africa, he told me. People who come here and have a vacation while a lot of native Italians are working in the fields with no social rights. You have to look out for your community and the people that already live in your community, not the people that are coming from Africa. Matthias, a 29-year-old logistics expert in Berlin, formerly a center-left voter, had turned to the AfD for similar reasons. It's just a fact that more is done for refugees than for us, he said in 2017, a year after Germany had accepted 1 million refugees as part of Chancellor Angela Merkel's "We Can Do It" pro-refugee policy. Yeah. Pandemics lead to pogroms. A lot of my friends are still looking for work. Refugees just get money for free. They get preferential treatment when it comes to apartments. Everything is paid for them. Trump supporting Terry from East Tennessee, meanwhile, railed against people who shouldn't be here, who are taking benefits and finances and jobs away from people here who fought for our country. We have veterans that are homeless. They want to bring in refugees from other countries. We need to take care of our own people. Like coronavirus conspiracy theories, these are not the facts. Refugees in Germany do not get money for free beyond the same public welfare payments every citizen receives, and they actually face housing discrimination in many places. In the United States, veterans and citizens are eligible for far more benefits than refugees and undocumented immigrants. But for those who feel abandoned, alone, and ignored, for those who no longer feel bound to either fellow citizens or to the state, for those who are already more prone to seeing their environments as frightening and hostile, full of snakes, not sticks, and are more likely to be receptive to conspiracy theories, as recent research has established those who feel socially excluded or ostracized are, such narratives promulgated by right-wing populists are clearly attractive. Looking at you, QAnon. Indeed, a recent analysis of over 30,000 people are recruited as part of the European Social Survey, an intensive questionnaire used by many social scientists, found that those who expressed the most extreme anti-immigrant views were distinguished not by basic demographics such as gender and age, but instead by financial insecurity, low levels of trust in their fellow citizens and government, and by social isolation. All in all, concluded researchers, people who feel politically disempowered, financially insecure, and without social support are the most likely to become extremely negative towards migrants. And what are those three characteristics? All of them are key drivers of loneliness. Providing someone else to blame, someone depicted as different from you, someone you don't actually know, for typically the very greatest anti-immigrant fervor is in places with low levels of immigration, has proven to be a winning strategy. In many cases, it has been more effective than casting the blame on the global economy, neoliberalism, automation, cuts in public spending, or misaligned government spending priorities, even if these are more accurate explanations for why many people feel marginalized. Right-wing populists understand better than anyone else the extent to which emotions trump rationality and complexity, and how powerful a tool fear can be. And they exploit this by repeating again and again their anti-other messages. Even if over the next few years support for the right-wing populist wanes, it would be premature to sound the death knell of populism. Its grips on the imaginations, emotions, and voting intentions of a considerable portion of citizens is likely to endure. And again, this book came out in 2021, so we know what's happened since. Of additional concern is that divisive, race-tinged rhetoric is often contagious in its own right. In an incendiary attempt to fend off a populist challenge from right-wing populist candidate Geert Wilders, the non-populist center-right Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, ran a newspaper ad in 2017 that instructed immigrants to be normal or be gone. Denmark's center-left Social Democrats were victorious in the 2019 general election with a manifesto that was disturbingly redolent of the far right when it came to issues of immigration. Indeed, in many ways, the greatest danger associated with the rise in populism in recent years is how it has pushed traditional parties of both the right and the left ever further to the extremes and normalized a discourse of divisiveness, distrust, and hate. Oh, what's up, Ed? I see you're meeting Twinkle. But my fear is that in a post-COVID-19 world, again, her language, not mine, these instincts will be further amplified. And maybe she means that just like since COVID started, though, so I guess that's kind of fine. And that the health and biological security of individual nations will not only be seen by populists as fertile ground to exploit, but that more centrist politicians will seek political capital by calling for the building of walls and blaming and demonizing others. This is not to dismiss people's individual accountability. Often it can be difficult to be sure what comes first: racist sentiment, the xenophobic messaging of populist leaders, and its amplification in social media, or the economic, cultural, and societal shifts that have led so many people to feeling marginalized, unsupported, unheard, and afraid. Oh yeah, of course, Mopar. I mean, I'm reading this as much for y'all as I am for myself, so I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for coming by. But what's clear is that for those who feel that they have no place in the world anymore, who feel a lack of belonging and absence of solidarity, for those who fear for their futures and feel abandoned and alone, hatred of others can become, as Hannah Arendt saw in Nazi Germany, a means of self-definition that mitigates their sense of aloneness and restores some of the self-respect formerly derived from their function in society. Especially, I would argue, in times of economic crisis. What Arendt describes here unties the sentiments of the lonely and dispossessed across generations, from those in the 1930s Germany to those right now in the 21st century. They're typified by the one young man, Wilhelm, whose words suggest he could be living in the Germany of the Third Reich or in any economically ravaged state today. This handsome young man of just under 6 feet in height, slender in build with dark hair and eyes, an extremely intelligent face, had been unemployed for a number of years after the economic downturn and explained how he felt like this. There wasn't room for any of us. My generation that worked so hard and with such terrible suffering just was not wanted. At the end of my time in university, I was unemployed for a year. For 5 years, I remained unemployed and was broken in body and spirit. I was not wanted by Germany, and certainly if I was not wanted here, I was not wanted anywhere in the world. Life for me became completely hopeless. In Wilhelm's case, he was in fact describing his feelings in the 1930s. He continued, "Just then I was introduced to Hitler. Life for me took on a tremendous new significance. I have since committed myself, body, soul, and spirit to this movement for the resurrection of Germany." The causes and consequences of loneliness are right at the heart of the biggest political and social questions our society faces. In recent times, it has been populist politicians who have tended to understand this best, in particular those on the right. But we cannot allow them to be perceived as the only politicians who proffer solutions to those experiencing loneliness. There's too much at stake. This means that politicians of every hue will need to find answers to some very demanding questions. How do we ensure that already vulnerable groups in society are not further marginalized? How do we make people feel supported and cared for in an age when resources are ever scarcer? And importantly, how do we get people to care not only for those who look like them with the same history and cultures and backgrounds, but also for those who don't? How do we bring people together in a world that's been pulling apart? Just as critically, our leaders must find ways to make all their citizens feel they are heard and seen, and they must make sure that people have enough opportunity to practice inclusivity, civility, and tolerance in their day-to-day lives. Now more than ever, we need politicians to put at the heart of their projects a credible commitment to the rebuilding of community at a local, national, and international level. And it's encouraging that the Biden administration has so explicitly committed to this. Side eye. Like I said, this was published in 2021, but still, I don't. But to understand how we can effectively turn the tide against loneliness, reinvigorate citizens' sense of community, and start to repair the fissures between us, we need to dig deeper. We need to understand more granularly why this is the lonely century, not just for those heeding the siren call of populists, but for all of us. And this work starts with our cities, for they are increasingly becoming epicenters of isolation. All right, that was chapter 3. What do y'all think? I think that was a really important chapter. I have so I've written more so. One of my first journal articles actually was about Left Book. So like the leftist Facebook groups and pages that share memes as a form of socio-political identity formation. And that's actually like why anyone at MEA like remotely has heard of who I am. And even though I was like just a PhD, I was in the very first year of my PhD program when I wrote that. And I won the MEA convention's top convention paper award. And so I got like a little placard and like a copy of McLuhan's book, The Mechanical Bride, like a first edition from somebody who donated it to me and shit like that. And but that is to say that I've studied more about that than I have anything related to the right and the use of rhetoric and social media, although I know that there is just an incredible amount of research about it. And this book, I think, is giving me that connection and inroad to like better understand how my research relates to that. And I hope that y'all are seeing it and like how it can make you think about that understanding with folks in your life as well. Because I think, of course, it's never been more relevant. And even though this is a couple years old, like it's still gonna, I think, give us more of the contextual understanding so that we can understand how and why things are the way that they are today. And so I'm excited to like see more about what this book will have to offer us in that regard. All right. I think so tonight on Sundays, I just started this Twitch like 6 days ago. So I've been like so grateful to have so much support already because I hear that sometimes it can take folks like literally months and months and months to get like the 50 followers. So thanks to everyone here, especially the folks on Twitch. If you're on TikTok, come over to Twitch. I'm absolutely loving what Twitch has to offer. It has a very special thing, I think. Oh, what's up, Blake? to anything. Oh, Dookie Mookie. Hello, hello. Because, like, I didn't know. Hi, Mrs. Dr. Bird. Okay, so backstory on fucking on Stardew Valley. I'm Dr. Bird on there because obviously, and whenever I like walk up to a neighbor in Stardew Valley, it calls me Miss Dr. Bird because I wasn't supposed to put doctor in there, I guess. But Twitch is awesome. I'm absolutely loving it. Like in the same way that there's an amazing thing happening on TikTok since COVID started, I really think that there's such an amazing thing happening on Twitch too. And I'm like so new into the door, but I'm already absolutely living for it. Yeah, Mrs. and Miss Dr. Bird. Dookie Mookie. What is that, a penguin? What is that? Like I said, I gotta find a way to make the chat bigger. I should find, okay, originally this box that's like right here was the chat, but then I didn't think it worked at first, so I just put it as my like follower goal. But I'm gonna try to find a way to add the chat back so that I can see y'all on here easier. Oh, a dancing cat. Oh, okay, good. I love it. But yeah, I'm like absolutely like, and I've barely like begun to really like see how much cool shit people are doing on Twitch, but I'm absolutely loving it so far. So thank you all for like, you know, giving me follows. Like this is so much, it's so much more support than I could have expected. But yeah, people sometimes takes like months and months and months to get like the 50 followers and whatnot to get affiliates. So it means everything to me that y'all are like here and hanging out, and hopefully me sharing this information and my whole approach can be beneficial to you. If anything, just nice to hang out with folks of like minds, or even if we're not exactly alike, just like learning and chatting and hanging out. Yay, I know. See, that's what honestly, that's what I kind of was thinking. So I like more so started a Twitch account because, and they were in here earlier actually. I was watching like a couple people that I met because they play like Phasmophobia and like what else? Like Demonologist and like those ghost games. But I can't play them because I have a Mac and they're all basically like in alpha and only allowed on PC. But I noticed that there's like a shift in like bigger creators that like, because I when I first came across them, they had a smaller following, and it like is like, you know, it's like a cozy, like nice, like I can actually talk to all of you, the comments aren't going super fast, and it like I'm happy for them. They've gotten like great success even just over the last like week or two, which is like really cool to see. But also it's like it's a distinctly different vibe when you have like a smaller feel in, or like a smaller following on Twitch. And I know that they had a bigger following when I met them anyway. Like I think they had like a couple hundred folks, but now they're like really taken off. Like they're like number 3 on gaming on TikTok today. When I saw them last, like they were getting gifted like 30 galaxies or like it was intense. Like I'm super happy for them, but it's like yeah, it's just a different vibe. I know, I'm really happy for them. I have them suggested on here. They're it's Bim Bam Gaming. They're great. You should go follow them for sure. It's Ryan and Christian. They're very cool. I like them a lot. All right. Oh yeah, I know. Like I said, I was gonna hop off to eat some dinner, but I'm gonna be back. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. On Sundays, I guess actually from 7 to 9 Eastern time, I said I was gonna do like a just chatting. So I was thinking either I would just hang out and we can hang like just talk, or I would continue more of this reading, whatever y'all want. But yeah, that's what'll be on Sunday. I made a little schedule a couple nights ago, so check that out. Obviously, I do stuff outside of the schedule, but that's just like what's for sure gonna happen each week. I gotta stream at least every day. So this is what I do now that the summer started. Excuse me. I've been trying to like hold back that burp for a while and it eventually just skipped. But yeah, anyway, I stream it every day. And yeah, I'm just happy if anyone comes to hang out. So thanks for stopping by. I'm having a great time. Every day. I know, yeah. Well, cause yeah, that's true. I know maybe I'll change it. It's not like it's like big, like it's not like gaming or reading every day. It's like it's a variety of stuff. I don't know. I'm type A, so like usually if I get in the mindset of like not doing stuff, that's when I want to do stuff. And this is still like novel and new and fun for me. But you're right though. I should You're not welcome. I just saw that, Blake. But yeah, I'll make sure that I respect my boundaries and check in and stuff. But if anything, it's just nice to hang out with y'all, you know? Like I'm having a great time. I want to do all the things. Okay, so far we got Because what? I'm trying to think. Stardew Valley, Little Spooky Escape Games, Horror Shorts last night, reading my poetry, generally just talking about neoliberalism, reading whatever we want. So I don't know. Yeah, I'll keep an ear to the ground if you got any suggestion. Oh yeah, I've published like almost 100 poems actually. But yeah, I read some. The stream is still available on my Twitch from Friday night. Friday night is poetry nights. So check that out. I yeah, I got a bunch of poems. So go check that out. I'm gonna export all the videos because until I get affiliate, the streams they only stay on Twitch for like a week, I guess, before it like expires. So I'm gonna make sure to like export all the ones. I have a little folder on my YouTube already. It's just called like Dr. Bird on Twitch. Twinkle wants some treats. Hell yeah, good. Yay. I'm a leftist, yes. What gave it away? Yeah, you bet, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yay. All right. Time to eat some food. I'll see you all later if anything, but I've never any pressure. Always just excited to hang out, but yeah, live your life. Of course. Good. Yeah, check out all my content. I mean, all my publications give it away. All my content just talking to me for more than like 5 minutes. Yeah. Oh, don't worry, Blake. We'll be back in like literally like a half hour. I just gotta like eat some. I have like a bunch of vegan energy bars. Basically, the Stardew Valley equivalent of like one of those things that you put together with like acorns and like some other nuts and seeds after you cut down trees. Like that's the kind of shit that I'm is one of my main safe foods nowadays. So I'm gonna eat like 5 of those and then I'll probably be back. But yeah, 9 to 7, just chatting. We'll just hang out. Maybe we'll do whatever. All right, I'll see you all later. Drink some water, have some foods, get some rest, chill out, do something nice for yourselves. We all deserve better. Oh no, my computer locked. See, it's funny because TikTok can see it, but I don't think Twitch can actually see it. All right, this is my stream over. I see you all later. Ciao. Thanks again for hanging out. I talk to you later.